Great.
I was interpreting.
Oh, okay.
Interpreter.
701.
Oh.
Is everyone here?
That's not words I usually associate with.
Is Jason here?
I just want to get his back.
No, thanks everyone. Stop breaking that.
I'm so delighted to have him.
Oh.
Don't think that big difference. So, I'm gonna ask for a check. I was surprised to see him here.
It's always on special. Because it's special.
Well, it's not
We
always
always
on.
put it at the
It's up to
end.
you.
But you don't have
We
to
don't
put
have
it
to.
on at all. I understand. I do put it on, but I just don't put it on twice. Right?
Yeah.
All right, everyone here? I know Jason is summer, but I'm gonna start since it's already 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 14, 2024 Board of Education Special Meeting. Call to order of the special meeting is present here this evening is Mrs. Galaldi, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Maxichelli, Mr. Asa, Superintendent Stani, myself, Mrs. Jacobson, Mrs. Guernsey, Mrs. Lynn, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Krasnov. If everyone can rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Testani, you want to start us off?
Sure.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rolo down the wrong way. Sorry. All right. We had a request. Sorry, I had a Rolo go off. Is there any board objection for me to allow for public comment? There is a music concert this evening. There are some parents who would like to get to that music concert that would like to give public comment in order to go to the concert. Is there any objection for the board to allow for that?
We're going to have 2 public comments.
Yeah, do you have an objection? You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, then, thank you. So I will allow for public comment now. If you would like to come up on any of our agenda items, you can feel free to give public comment. Just name your name and address, no microphones anymore. Hi, just speak, you know.
Dina Ryder, 400 Flintlock Road. So I am currently the Board of Ed representative at Dwight Elementary School. Over the past school year, I've been receiving a lot of questions from concerned parents regarding the condition of the school, specifically air quality and temperature. I'm also a physician, and I've had a lot of parents express concerns to me about mold, excessive heat, and potential health effects that these exposures may have on their children. I don't know what to tell these parents. As you know, this past fall, Dwight, along with a select few other schools, were shut down for 2 days due to unsafe temperatures within the school. As global temperatures continue to rise, this is an issue that we can expect to pop up time and time again. This creates an inequitable situation for those families affected at these schools. We will continue to follow along as the Board of Ed discusses plans to improve our school along with other schools and bring it up to the necessary standards that our children and staff deserve. We need our children and staff to be in healthy and comfortable environments. It goes without saying that this standard needs to be applied to all of Fairfield schools. Thank you for all you've done for the communities. We are so glad to see all the progress that's been made this far. Please continue to advocate for safe and healthy learning environments for all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Efren. I am the current co-PTA president at Dwight Elementary. I have it this year. I will be next year, along with Megan McHale. I'm also the Board of Ed rep for our LMS. Not that that affects what I'm commenting on now. Did I say my address? I don't know if I did. 241 Burr Street. Sorry. I care about this, building the new Dwight. I care about this so much, I left my 7th grader spring concert to come here and make a comment on the fly and then rush back before the band begins. Don't worry, orchestra and chamber orchestra come first. So I should be able to. I sat through a 2-hour meeting 2 weeks ago for the facilities board and listened to every other elementary school in the district list their building needs and improvements. Everyone wants more space. Bathrooms, Zen dens, separate dedicated art or gym space, repairs, upgrades, and HVAC. All we want is safe air, comfortable temperatures, and mildew-free returns. In short, we need HVAC for Dwight. We need a new building. I have, from the beginning of the school year, chased down Angela's Papa George, Anna's Galgo, to try to just get a Band-Aid for our building. Simply fix the split units that we have, and with Mr. Tastani's permission, we raised money last year at our annual spring gala to try to afford new split units. We were able to raise money and have the ones that are coming. These are temporary fixes. This is not a solution. We need a new building. Please consider seed funding to bring us up to the standard that every other building in the district has. Please make sure that this is a priority, not only for our students and our staff, but for the well-being of all. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Megan McHale. I'm a parent at Dwight and Roger Ludlow, and I'm also the VP of Sustainability for the PTA Council, which means I run the green teams that we have in our district. And I want to advocate for a new Dwight, and I would love for the new Dwight to be a net zero building. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to take note of other schools and districts in Connecticut that have taken this step towards, forgive me, I'm not thinking. But what we could do with a net zero school that would include geothermal, solar, and insulation, as well as an air filtration system that would accommodate the poor air quality in Fairfield County and potentially save hundreds of thousands of dollars every year for this new building. So I would just advocate for that on behalf of the green team. Apologies for my hurriedness.
State your address for the record, please.
Oh, sure. It's 188 Reed.
There's one parent in the elevator who wants to speak. I don't know if there's. Okay. Yes. Rachel Gerber, no relation to Jessica. 176 Butternut Lane. I have a first grader who's currently at Dwight, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old who will attend in the future. We love our little school up on the hill. It's incredible teachers and staff. I beg you to consider the current physical condition of Dwight when looking at your planning timeline. The state of the building and what our educators, staff, and children are exposed to is unacceptable. I don't think it's too much to ask for a clean and safe school for our children and teachers. Watching the kids get off the bus, dripping in sweat from their days in 100-degree classrooms is heartbreaking and truly appalling. The teachers who have to walk around a classroom while being engaged in this heat is unheard of. And our kids having to miss school because the school has to close due to unsafe temperatures is also unacceptable. There's no question that this building needs to be rebuilt and that it needs to be happening soon for the well-being of everybody inside. Thank you so much for advocating for our children and for all of the hard work you've done.
Thank you. All right, enjoy the concerts. All right, moving on. Business items, draft Board of Education long-range facilities plan. I'm definitely not gonna be going through this whole plan word for word with you. But first I'd like to start off by thanking Papa George and Mr. Testani, members of the Facilities Committee, but also to all the building administrators. We had almost 100% of our building administrators come across 4 separate meetings and meet with us, take time out of their busy days away from their buildings. Truly appreciative of all of their input, where we learned a lot from them, right? And I think it was a really great time hearing from their administrators and what they feel the needs of their buildings are from a physical plant, but also from an educational standpoint today, and just how things have changed since the last time that this plan was adopted by the board in 2012. So very high level. I'm going to go through the actual draft plan that is in your backup. Very high level. So you will see ultimately there's going to be a new table of contents with new page numbers as that gets finalized in the first read. You'll see that we are new planning principles that we recently adopted back in December of 22, I believe, are replaced. We've got the new projections for elementary, middle, and high school that will be inserted from our 10-year enrollment projections. We then get into building by building updates for each of the buildings. ECC, or the Early Childhood Center, is not currently actually in this plan, so that's been added to the plan. Again, going through each of the buildings for updates and changes. For that, you will also see 3 new items for each building added to this plan for each building where they are applicable for boilers, roofs, and elevators. Not all buildings have elevators, so you won't see that in every building. Important to capture those in the plan going forward. We've got a beyond 10-year placeholder just to give a future reader or a future board at this point in time what we anticipate beyond the 10-year scope. As we had discussed with you when we brought this before you in March, cutting anything that has to do with timing or costs out of this, because that lives on a separate document, our waterfall and our cash flow that we go over with the Board of Finance. And by the time we vote on it, it probably wouldn't be accurate anyway in terms of dollars. So this is really just a true statement of need for each building versus a timeline or cost estimate. Those live in other places. We've got a new utilization chart that I want to get some input on from you guys, actually replacing the old one. We've got several appendices that will be added. In fact, I noticed that the elevator one wasn't in this draft, but appendix for roof, boiler, and elevators. The idea for that is, or waterfall for them, is to be able to update that without having to bring this whole document back to the board, like just have appendices that can get updated on those items, and outlining for each of those things, when was it done and when was it due, so we know for future purposes. If you got a roof in 2022, someone in 15 years from now will know that it's due in 2047 or whatever it might be. So future planning items is that. In addition, you have a memo to the board from the Facilities Committee trying to capture some of our more recent conversation around some of the upcoming building projects. You've got some questions on Mona Terrace as it pertains to the ECC that we've been looking at with both town and amongst the district. So I would anticipate going over some of those questions with you. And then you've got the concepts in depth that we discussed in the facilities committee with administration and what our consensus is at this time. So that is a lot. It's a lot of paper. I will, if Mr. Tassani has anything to open on the work or before I open up to the board at all.
No, I would just add that I think the facilities committee did a great job in garnering the input of the building administration. I think that was an important component to making sure that people that live in the buildings and have to operate within those buildings were heard. And I think that it has addressed some of the short and long-term needs of the district as well. So a lot of work went into this, and it's, I think, a job well done. So thank you to the committee who put a lot of time and effort in a condensed time frame.
All right, so we just want to, this is just a draft. It's not a first read. This is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on this draft. Eager to hear everyone's feedback, changes, edits on any of these. So that we are meeting tomorrow morning, actually at 9:30, in order to further work on the draft to bring you a first read in June and a vote in June. So that is our regular meeting tomorrow. If Mr. Lee or Mr. Krasnoff have anything to open us up, otherwise I will open it up to the board.
Just wanted to make a quick statement, say, thanks to the whole committee team for all the hard work we put in. And so the whole board knows we looked at everything for every single school, and every single option, us and the administrators. So there was really a lot of thought and effort put in. So hopefully you see that when you look through it, you come up with your questions, and hopefully the public sees that.
All right, Mr. Peters?
Can I start with a process question?
Sure.
What's the role of this memo going to be in terms of the plan itself? You're talking about the plan as a statement of need, but this is where recommendations lie, even though there are some recommendations.
So in the plan, under Dwight Jennings, you will see both of those have the existing language that was passed in 2012, which would be just renovations of those 378s, plus a placeholder. But based on what this board wants to do, we would actually fill in. There is a paragraph that was originated from Mr. Papa George when after Mill Hill wasn't built to the 541 unit. We know on our waterfall, right, that on the waterfall is Dwight is a 504. But in this plan, it's not. So that's for us, for everyone to let us know that this.
So I guess just to simplify, you imagine a future version of this incorporating some recommendations from the board in text in this. That may not necessarily be this document, but whatever we come to an agreement.
Oh, yeah, no. I just wanted to give the board where we landed and then come to you and open that up. Because what's in the plan right now is just a renovation for both schools of the 378. So ultimately, we want to change that, we need to change it, right? So that's all. Just wanted to give you an idea of a narrowed scope of everything we discussed and where we were. Go ahead.
I have a broad series of questions. I don't know where quite I should begin, but maybe it might help focus a little bit if we could get an update on what the status of Mona Terrace is and whether that's a place that we can start thinking about planning, whether it's a place that the town is going to let us use.
Yep. Answer is yes. We can. I had submitted a bunch of questions on Mona Terrace. I mean, a lot of them are district, and I will let Mr. Papa George, because he.
Can I just clarify, because I was wondering who the I was in those questions. Is that you? Okay.
I have to put everything, like my thoughts on paper. So Mr. Papa George, as we all know, we toured Mona Terrace, but Mr. Papa George has been there several more times with her Mr. Mancusi. So maybe if you could just give us where we are today with that property, what you're doing, what you're waiting for, and when we anticipate to get further information.
So, as I said, Mr. Mancusi and myself toured it a few more times. We've also toured it at this point with an architect engineer firm. After that tour, we kind of went through what was needed. Based on the recommendation of the facilities committee, we looked at it as two projects. For day one, what would we need if we wanted to go in there, make it work for us as either a day one just to get in the door, or even a day one to get in the door for as a temporary housing to cover a stopgap. So we're working with the architects and engineers. We're hoping to have a pencil sketch by end of this week with a dollars associated with that by the end of the following week. That would give us a day one through the door. What would we need to make that space work for us? And step two of that is we're going to go through again. We've not through the building, but through it again and look at what we would need to make this a 10-year and beyond permanent home for an ECC location, such as the bathrooms and classroom. That's like stuff we wouldn't do for day one, but we do down the line. So we've met with the architects. We've had that. We should have a pencil sketch for us by Friday. Mr. Mancusi and myself will review it. If it looks good, we will ask them to put the numbers to that sketch.
Okay,
The town is okay with us using how much space in that building?
So that was a question that went back and forth a few times. We toured it with several different stakeholders in that event. And we've come up with an area that they've said we can definitely have, and that there's other areas in the building where the senior center utilizes, but we'd be able to work out scheduling with them so that there is more areas, such as the gym, for instance, is an area that during one tour, we were told it's wide open whenever you want. During a second tour, we were told, oh, no, it's used every day. And then further conversation with the town was we can come up with a mutually agreeable schedule where you'd be able to use it, we'd be able to use it, it'd be a shared space. So there's space in there. There's some other spaces such as what used to be a library is now their yoga center, which we talked to them while we were there with the architects, and we can divide that space up, put an OT-PT center in there and still leave a large enough area for like an indoor recess on a rainy day area, as well as they could use that space for their yoga activities certain days as well.
How many classrooms? Because I know when we toured with Julie DeMarco, director of the senior center, and it seemed that she was hoping to use some of those classrooms in the northern wing of the school what we're talking about.
When we went back with Julie and other people, we were told that all those classrooms would be utilized by the ECC program.
And has there been any claim about, I know that the Department of Health, which is currently in trailers behind the property, I believe was hoping to move in there. Is there no thought about trying to get them shared space in the building as well?
Not in a conversation I was privy to. So.
I have a lot of other questions, but I can happy to pass along.
sure.
So with regard, thank you, Mr. Peterson, for opening this, because I do have questions about the building. And could you tell us who ultimately is the decision maker for saying definitively that the Fairfield Public Schools can use this space, and for how long?
So that's twofold. So my understanding is it's going to be the selectmen vote.
I apologize to interrupt. I'm not looking for your understanding. I'm looking for an action. I'm not no disrespect.
Sure.
I'm looking for an actual answer. Who is the person in town or people in town that are the ultimate decision makers for this?
So as I said, twofold. The first one would be, as the building is not currently used as a school, we would have to go before zoning to get approval as to reopen it as a school site. So that would be the first step of it. For the second part of that, I could not answer who actually signs the lease of the space currently and who has the authority. I know we've been speaking directly to Mr. Gerber and his staff, so I would assume, but I don't want to assume that it would be them that would give us the ultimate go-ahead.
With regard to the zoning, so the fact that a childcare center is in there now is not enough to grandfather it back in because there was a gap between.
There's been a gap. It's a private company running a preschool program there now. We'd be looking to name it as a public school again. Whether that would be up to the zoning board, whether they would allow that as a grandfather or want to have a vote on it. I would say we would be.
So have those conversations at least had at a preliminary level?
Not at this point. We wanted to see where the board was with it before we started down those roads.
So I'm just going to say, I have a lot of difficulty wrapping my head around this if we don't have some concrete answers. And like, if we spend all this time, and I mean, this idea sounds great as a stopgap to me, right? Until we have space at other schools that's added on and projects that we're talking about that are in this plan. But if we spend several meetings or several months, whatever this takes, and then come to find out that it's not going to get through zoning, or there's somebody else in the town that has to go through, or another body, I'm just a little reluctant on our timeline, and maybe this is to the chair, of a June vote, because I don't know, normally things with planning and zoning need to be noticed, they go on agendas, they go for potentially public hearings on something. So I'm just curious on how that all factors in with our timing here.
So our facilities plan, right, is we'll put in what we want to put in it per this board. And then if the consensus is that we want to move forward with the Mona's Terrace property, then we will move forward. I mean, it's been clear, this board has to make its decisions about what it wants to do. And then we follow whatever procedures. There's a lot of questions like the FEMA cap. How much is that actually? How are we going to have 100% allocation of that FEMA cap towards whatever repairs that need to come in order to get to that day one or beyond? So there are definitely a lot of questions on it. The point is, do you guys want to use Mona Terrace as an ECC, yes or no, in order to keep moving forward? I don't know if planning and zoning saying yes or no would decide whether or not the board feels that that would be a great place for us to use as a temporary measure while we build our more permanent sites.
I guess then I'll get to my questions about finances. So was there any discussion about the idea, and this would be different than before? I mean, obviously knowing the town owns all of the buildings, right? They own our buildings, but we're designated as schools and we have control over those properties and whatnot. Was there any discussion with the town on this remaining a town building and us leasing it in a sense for a cost transfer in the budget? So we are tenants in essence, and our annual costs would cover the whatever as would they would be a landlord in essence. Like if we were going to, in the past, we've looked at church buildings for ECCs that didn't work out. But that was the concept, right? That the Fairfield Public Schools would have an allocation in the budget to pay an annual fee for a location. Is that something that's even possible?
I can say from my standpoint, I don't know if, we haven't had that conversation yet. That being said, as you said, it is a town-owned building. We kind of maintain the town buildings that are schools. Even our other schools, when we leased the church building, we maintained and operated that building. We did repairs to it. So I would think that this being a town building would be the same thing. If it's a space that we are occupying, we would maintain that space.
Operating, yeah.
Okay, so then I guess for me, as we move along in this process, it won't just simply be a, yes, I want to use Mona Terrace, because I might want to use Mona Terrace, but at what expense? So I'll have to know those numbers. I want to know what exactly is going to be our budgetary impact, both from a capital improvement and investment stance and also an ongoing annual expense, because I don't see this being a permanent solution. I never have, I never will. I'll just go on the record right now with that, because I don't believe if we're going to make this a permanent solution, I think we would need to do major renovations, and I don't want to put money into a floodplain school. I think we've had enough disasters with FEMA and buildings in this town already. So that being said, if this were a short-term solution, I'd be very curious, because what I don't want to do is start throwing taxpayer dollars to something that's a temporary solution that once we get going on it, and let's say we find that we need to do this or whatever, we start to do something with the bathrooms and then find that the waistline is cracked in the concrete or something like that. I mean, this building is old, and I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to say it's been neglected, because there has been, some upkeep kept, because there is a business in there and there's a senior center. But much like with my concerns about Dwight in the current building, and when we get in the walls, what are we going to find? So are we really looking to put our kids that are in a program, many of which have special needs that include air quality? Like, what are we, you know, because looking at, looking at our HVAC phase one, I mean, look at what that cost. So if we were going to make this a permanent solution and not do a rebuild, we're going to think, I mean, we're talking about probably 4 phases just for air conditioning. So I throw that out there, and I say it because I'm cautious. I want to have these discussions, and I want to have more of these full board discussions, because we've been talking about having full board discussions about this for years. And there's other concepts that have come out. And first of all, I forgot to say thank you to the facilities committee for taking this, you know, this initial stab at it. But this is a full board discussion, and this is a full table discussion, because there may be some fundamental ideas about, you know, if we're going to talk about doing a full rebuild, you know, is that the location for it? Is that, you know, I'm just throwing things out there, that, again, between the unanswered questions here and that, I think that this is, I'm very happy to be here tonight, but I think this is going to go on personally for months
Yes.
and not be voted on in June.
Yeah, well, it is going to be, because it is going to be voted on in June. And the reason why it's going to be voted on in June is that Mr. Papa George is to spend the summer updating our waterfall and our cash flow to prepare for the Board of Finance capital planning project.
Well, it's not the board's purview to tell Mr. Papa George what he's going to do all summer, because he might have other things. So I have
Well, I
respect that, but yeah.
We've
Mr.
talked
Papa
about
George
this,
has a lot of work
in
to
order
do
for him
without
to
this.
do his job, to prepare for August 29th, to bring us our new cash flow. Believe me, we've had lots of conversations, and prepare for the capital planning workshop. We do need to vote. And it's not that so the memo is to tell you what our consensus is around a temporary solution, and to not put in a lot of money into that facility precisely for some of the reasons that you've mentioned already, but in order to operationalize it so that we can alleviate pressure in our other schools while we are working on the other buildings, because our other schools have pressures that need alleviation on them. Mr. Krasnov.
Can I just finish?
Just gonna follow up.
Can I just
sorry.
finish my thought here? Then I'll turn it over. So just for the record, I understand your reasoning and wanting to have this for the August 29th, you know, capital planning, but as a board, I want us to put forth something that we are solid on, and not put something forward. And if it means that we're not ready, then we have those discussions with the town finance.
I just wanted to follow up on that. We had a lot of similar discussions to what you are bringing up in the committee. We all don't want to spend a ton of money. At least the committee felt we didn't want to spend a ton of money. That's why we come up with a temporary option. And in talking to Mr. Papa George, he felt it could be done at a reasonable expense. That's part of the reason we did recommend that. But we were also told, as far as I understand, by the town, until we tell them we want it, it is what it is. So we need to say, yes, we want it, and then try to work it out and make the cost as minimal as possible. I can tell you, I have an idea of a number that I'm comfortable with. I'm sure everybody at the table has numbers that they're comfortable with. But I don't think we can even get there until we tell the town, yes, we want it, and then we can really push it forward. Just
Mr. Lee.
my 2 cents.
Just to reinforce something, we are definitely sure that the town has given the daycare center its year notice. That came from
Town Hall.
the first selectman already gave the,
Yes. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Maxon Canale.
I have other questions, but there's just one word that keeps being used that and I appreciate that Mr. Asa spoke definitively to this, but why does it have to be temporary? I mean, this was on the tour, I was blown away by this space looked perfect. And while I'm still of the mindset that I wish we could have a one-site ECC, I'm not sure that this board or any board might get itself around to the plan that would entail that. Therefore, the next best thing to a one-site ECC, to me, was a two-site ECC. And this is the only building that I've seen which really seemed, and again, we still have to talk about Dwight and Jennings, but why are we assuming temporary? Why, and again, minus getting all of the money, minus finding out about the FEMA cap, and is it possible? Philosophically, why aren't we looking at this as a possible permanent solution?
I think part of it was the fact that if we're gonna do major construction projects at either Dwight or Jennings, that adding an ECC, we have the opportunity to design it and construct it that will meet the needs of the district. And also, we can get a higher reimbursement from the state on those projects. If on at least the portion, we have to clarify if it's on the entire project or just the portion that adds the ECC component to it. But there is, I believe, a 16%.
And also that's very small. There are full-size classrooms there, but they're not actually services spaces. So we're gonna have to erect walls to provide for OT, the PT, the speech and all of that. They have the classrooms, but not the services spaces. So linking long-term, this probably is not actually gonna be a big enough site.
And I think the other issue was, you know, having the shared spaces, how that could not maybe work long. I mean,
Well,
right now.
alarms were going off and that mentioned well, we've got our kids in there, we can't be sharing space.
Well, great example, we've never had full-time fours before for preschool.
Full-time what?
Full-time fours. Or for full-time pre-K, period. And once you go to full-time preschool, you have to have food service. Right? So we can't necessarily use that kitchen because it's being used by the seniors, and we're not gonna supplant the seniors' use of that space. So there are caveats around that. So the full-time fours would have to go to Ward. They won't be able to, the part-time students would go to this place. So there's all these different nuances once you have different programming in place and what their requirements are from the state. The kitchen was also one of the long-term issues.
But again, just hypothetically, if we were able to address those, this is still thought to be, would be too small a footprint ultimately
My
to be, so
understanding-
that we could have a 2-site ECC.
Small footprint.
See, I guess that goes with, I guess I'm like, it just seems like we're opening up a can of worms here. I'm hearing more and more issues or things that we do need to discuss. This is why I think Mr. Asa said this is more of a long-term discussion, because you first said that there's gonna be a sketch coming out at the end of this week, a pencil sketch with numbers for day one. But then and then in 2 weeks, there's gonna be another pencil sketch with bathrooms in the classrooms, additional resources needed for a 10-year plan. So is that?
I think it would be helpful for us and other town boards to know, like, for a temporary solution, in order to provide some temporary space, they want to see cost options, right? So cost option number one is the temporary solution. And here's what it would cost to actually redo the whole thing. That's probably most likely definitely not going to be under the FEMA cap, but it's going to be helpful to our committee, this board, I would assume, and also the town boards to know what were the differences in the cost estimates for that facility.
Okay, I think I'm still wrapping my head around it. I think I'm kind of stuck with Mrs. Maxon Canelli's, I guess, like, then why 100, I guess, can you just tell me why 100% this would not be a long-term solution is due to space? Too small. Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you.
And we were looking at the options for the other buildings,
Yeah,
also on the sheet, to build the space that they spoke of.
Yeah, because every 5-room cluster needs a 1.0, and as you saw in the memo, you need to have a speech. Every 5 rooms needs at least speech, psych, social worker, a 1.0 OTPT, plus some sort of an admin space where you can hold your PPTs. So if you think about 10 classrooms, it's not 10 classrooms, right? It's really 20 spaces, right?
Time to ask this question, but why are we at this point and without until June, why are we deciding to put in concrete, to etch in stone a 3-site ECC? When we were talking about these things, I know, but when we were talking about these things when you and I first came on the board, we had meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And I feel like this plan says 3 without the broad board discussion.
We're having that broad board discussion now.
I know, but we're gonna
We've been
be
having
here
it since
very
2018.
late. Not in this format.
And also because we have to make decisions on the schools that are waiting to have their renovations for Jennings, Dwight, and Osborne.
I know, which was why I think June is a very optimistic estimate on your part.
Yes, it is. So I just think the board needs to make its decisions. What do you want to do? You know the options.
Just pick a number, just pick a number, 2 or 3 or 1 or 11, or what are we doing here? You want us to pick a number by June for something that we have been wrestling with aggressively
Yes.
for like 6.5
Me
years.
too. I would like for you to make a decision, yes.
All right.
Because again,
What
6
if,
years,
what if the decision about 3 is no?
and that is the
That's your
decision.
decision.
I think,
Oh, sorry, shh. Really,
I think this committee has done its research. We brought in the people from the town, the administrators and things like that. And we had the same kind of discussions, 2 or 1 or whatever the case. And it came to this deciding theory that 3 would work out well. Maybe it didn't 6 years ago or whatever the case may be. I think for the better of the students, 3 is definitely needed, especially for the space. And at the end, it also does alleviate schools that classrooms are taking over the ECC. It allows those other schools to go to free up those classrooms, to let those students there take full advantage of the schools, the way I look at it. If you look at a Holland Hill situation, the 504 school that we built specifically for 504, this is before ECC came a thing. And when we heard the reports that 30% of the kids in our town have IEPs and this and that, it was never part of that factor, right? And so when you add those to a school that was already designated to 504, you're bulging at the seams right now. This will alleviate that, is what we feel and what we heard from the administrators at that time.
if you have an alternative, you're free to share it with the committee and we can talk about it tomorrow.
With respect to Mr. Lee, he's referring to having discussions with members of the town. I'm assuming he means the administration. Where's Mr. Mancusi? Like, how come we as a board can't have those conversations?
We can, we're here right now. We're having the conversation right now, and I brought it in March. So this is the second conversation.
Well, let's be fair, in March, it was presented as, this is something that's coming down the pike and I want to acquaint you
Yes.
with what's coming. We did not, there was 10:30, I believe, when we got to that, in that meeting, that was not set aside for a fulsome discussion on these issues.
Right, so.
And we didn't have this recommendation in front of us at the time, which is dated Friday.
Yes, exactly. We met on May 6th. So do you have anything feedback on the plan for any of the buildings?
I think that it's not incumbent on individual members to come to this meeting with fully laid out plans. I think that it's a perfectly normal thing for us to do as a full board, to discuss options, to talk about potentials.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now.
Well,
And not get upset. I think not get upset. I think too, Jason, like providing feedback and evidence and, why 3. I think that's what we're looking for, not getting upset when we're digging and trying to figure out the answers. So I think that's what you're trying to say a little bit. I don't want to speak for you, but I guess that's more how I'm feeling. Like, if we're digging, I don't want to see people, you can feel a certain way, but don't get upset if I'm digging or asking questions. I know you've done the research, so convince me why 3 is good. And I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Lee, and, the research that you did and you've been doing. I just need to hear that because I'm reading through these and I'm confused.
I didn't think I was getting upset.
No, you weren't getting upset. You weren't getting upset. You provided evidence and you spoke to the research that you've done with the facilities committee. And I thank you for that. That's what I need to get comfortable with understanding this a little bit more.
I just want to say thank you to the facilities committee. I was able to listen to the last meeting, which I actually thought was helpful for myself in preparing for this, to kind of hear their work and then reading the backup and kind of seeing it laid out and really seeing this as the first plan on paper that I've seen that moves us forward as a community. Not a single project, not a single plan, but that consolidates, because the reality is that every piece of the continuation of our waterfall impacts each other. So to make a decision about Dwight, at least for me, prior to sitting in this seat, sitting in the audience, the onus was to make a decision about this, we have to make a decision about that. To make a decision about this, we have to, and this is the first time I've seen options, not just one, which there's a recommendation, which I'm just gonna state I support. But also there's a whole host of menu of other alternatives. So I very much appreciate the work of the facilities committee to bring something to us that we can start to discuss. And similar to other committees that have brought us, just last week, we heard policy come to us with class size that said, this is a robust discussion. Please come to us, but don't come to us with a no, come to us with no and an alternative. So when I heard Ms. Jacobson present to us, at 10:30 at night, I very much appreciate that. I took that as we are preparing for these conversations. When we toured Mona Terrace, conversations. When I looked at this backup conversation. So I think these conversations should continue till June, but this is a great place to start. And I am fully supportive of getting Dwight on board for their renovation. They have been in line for far too long. Jennings right behind them and a home for our ECC, whether it's 2 or 3, I think we should robustly discuss that. But I think 3, as a parent in the district, as someone who's been concerned about bus rides, I think it's a great alternative to look at. We wouldn't, I get concerned about our littlest learners. And when we were talking about even the possibility of having to send them to another town because we don't have room, that is a scary thought to me. This is a preemptive measure. The last thing we need in this town, and I said this in public comment before sitting on the board, is being reactive to a building being shut down because of mold or other issues or flooding. We are living in a new and different world, and not to be proactive. If I will happily vote any day to get us moving on a path and not continue kicking this facility's can down the road.
Well, that's, and that, it's a little frustrating to me that we literally spent months, multiple special meetings, reviewing all of this, talking to every single school, trying to look at what facilities we currently use, what facility needs we have, where there's overcapacity, where there's undercapacity, where the ECC could be. Honestly, we could go on for hours of all the things we looked at. But that's our job as a committee, is to look at all these things and try to come up with something like this with a recommendation. And it wasn't just the 3 of us. It was also the administration. It was also Mr. Papa George. So I would appreciate if, instead of just saying we can't do this in time, because we did most of the work for you. If you have extra questions or other options that all of you would like to add for us to look at, I would love to look at other options. I'm sure everyone on the committee would love to find any solution to this problem we possibly can find. This literally to us was as best we can do with our needs. It's not the dream list. I'm sure all of us would love to build a Taj Mahal. We cannot, but this is what we need now. There's certain schools that are getting close to overcapacity. We can alleviate some of that stress. We found temporary homes for the ECC in multiple locations. We're doing it again now. I would love to find maybe one and then a final move into a space that they can kind of create themselves, that the space they need. Last thing I want to hear is in 5 years that they don't have enough space. Let's build them the space they need. It's just, to me, this is everything that has been discussed since I sat in that audience, since I've been here on the board. And if anyone has a better solution, please bring it, but make an excuse that we're going to push it down the road because you can't vote by June. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that. We're not kicking the can down the road.
Mr. Asa.
Yeah, so with regard to the concept of adding space at the 2 schools slated for major renovations, intrigued about that. Question for the committee and through the chair.
Sure.
I know in months and years past in facilities, we've kind of glossed over the idea and the concept of enlarging Jennings more. So I'm curious to know the feedback on the idea, instead of putting ECC at Dwight, of expanding the footprint even more at Jennings with such a central location and making that let's say it was a 2-site ECC, for example. So what was found, and I know I had asked for this a long time ago to Mr. Papa George, what is the actual buildable area at Jennings?
Go ahead.
have that in front of me tonight, but I can get that for you. I know we had looked at it a long time ago.
Yeah, because that would be a question for me, because I've always been intrigued about the idea of expanding
Or at
Jennings.
Dwight, just one site.
No, for me, it's at Jennings because it's a more central location. So the idea was making Jennings bigger, and we had floated the idea of, a second floor for the older students, freeing up space lower down and then expanding a wing out. And it was my understanding years ago that there was room for that. And then there was some scuttlebutt about the property and the actual buildable square foot area. So I'd be very intrigued at that, because I would be very much in support of that idea. The idea of the ECC at Dwight concerns me from a location standpoint. So I would be very interested in that.
Except that we already have Ward on the east side, so there's no service on the west. So this would be in central, this would be a west, central, and east. So actually, transportation would be assisted by having the three, but go ahead.
I actually agreed with Mr. Asa. I was in the process of writing it and then he said it,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. Because I was topped it with the question, is this crazy? Because I consider the road that goes through between Woods and Jennings as being something that could be, just if I'm starting to imagine I'm really expanding out the notion of that road could be cut. I'm just saying this. Obviously, I'm saying something very flippantly that would involve a lot of work, Mr. Angela. I feel the need to, Mr. Papageorge, I feel the need to acknowledge that. But if that road were closed and that were expansion space and that were really reimagined, the thought of having, I've said from the jump, I want the one site ECC. I consent, I might have to give up on that. I'm not giving up on the idea of a two site. And I think Jennings offers us the best opportunity, and with the central location, I would not be in favor of that at Dwight. It is extremely distant. And I think there needs to be, additional discussion about Dwight. Obviously, Dwight absolutely needs a renovation. That's not the question. How it will then be used is a question, because we're going to have one shot at this. And the idea, and I will say through the chair to Mr. Krasnov, saying something is unacceptable, I understand that that might be your point of view. And I do agree, we need to make a decision. I'm not, ignoring that point. But I'm not going to be rushed into something. I want to make sure that these kinds of questions are answered. This is a plan I would be very intrigued by. Is a 378 and a significant expansion for a second site ECC on the Jennings property. And
Can I follow up?
Sure.
Clarify. More important is two sites. So if the buildable footprint or ledge and going 2 stories and all that kind of thing, because of ECC and the stairs and all that, then it would be fine at Dwight as well, because you're more interested in the 2 site. So if it's not at Jennings, is it still 2?
I'm interested in the second, in the central location of Jennings.
Okay, so again, I don't know, but what's the priority? 2 sites?
I'm not prioritizing one over the other. I want 2 sites, and I think the second site should be at Jennings. That's the site
Which might not be possible, so.
I understand, but no one's told me that that is not possible. That's what I'm interested in, and that's what I'd be interested in, the information on how that could be done.
Or if, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, I think it can be done. Now there could be an issue of, yes, but to blast into that or to do that, the way it's set up now, you could even have the separate entrance. I assume we'd need a separate entrance possibly for the ECC. But again, if you take that road out and that becomes part of the footprint of what would be the facility, I think there's huge potential there. So.
Mrs. Guernsey.
Oh, I just wanted to share my thoughts about the Facilities Committee memo.
Follow up on that.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just because one thing that I had actually, I had similar thoughts about Jennings and asked, and I just want to voice this concern because this would be my main concern. That is a very central location, and that would be a huge concern for me for just that reason. We have the Fairfield Woods Branch Library. We have Fairfield Woods Middle School, which I can tell you already has 2 different entrance locations that use that arterial road at, I would say, optimal compliance from parents on most days, and a lot of interaction from our police department already. We have the Jennings site there. The footprint is rather small in terms of parking. we have interior and arterial roads there that would then add an entire new school. That would be a lot of traffic. So I think I'd pretty immediately ask for some traffic input versus, looking at spreading that out a little bit more. So I just think all of these are so nuanced. So I just want to make sure that I was following up for that piece of it.
Oh, thank you. No, I was just responding to this memo, which I appreciate so much because so many times we get these updates without recommendations. And this project is enormous. So I'm really grateful for all of the work that went into it. And I don't know that we could have dealt it at the board table. So just grateful that this committee even exists, frankly. And I support the recommendations. But that being said, I don't have a personal preference about 2 to 3 sites. Like, to me, it could be like, it could come down to math. Like if it turns out the reimbursement rate, it helps us to spread it across 2 sites because of whatever is being enacted. Fantastic. I don't know if there's a real big argument for 2 or 3 sites that I've heard. So I feel like I'm flexible on that, but overall, I like these recommendations. Appreciate Ms. Maxine-Canelli bringing up the issue of, reimagining the campus of Jennings because, as Ms. Flynn said, the traffic issues are horrendous there. So if there are improvements we can make to that area through these projects, that's actually kind of exciting to me. Let's see what else. So I just appreciate the idea that we would be moving forward in some way. So I don't know that I would be approving moving into Mona Terrace, for example, even though I support this recommendation. Without knowing the cost, it would be impossible for me to say it. But as a starting point, I think it's brilliant. So appreciate that. So it's kind of where I am with that. And then I just have like something that's a little bit unrelated, but I just thought I'd throw it out now because HVAC is such a big driver to all these projects. There was an interesting comment that I heard about funding split units. And I wondered if someone here could speak to sort of like under what, if any, situations are we allowing parents and PTAs to fund split units in our schools? Because I wasn't aware that was happening. As a temporary solution, I've never heard of that happening.
So what was asked last year by the former PTA president at Dwight was if they could fundraise for the ductless standalone, which would help reduce some of the heat in the classrooms that they purchased off of Amazon. And ultimately, they did not have any impact on reducing any of the temperature in the rooms when it got hot. It was not split units. They were standalone, similar to dehumidifiers, but they were supposed to bring down the temperature. I did not see, Mr. Papa George looked at them, they weren't going to increase. They were just regular plugs, not anything that would require a 220. So they didn't work.
So that's not something that we would be looking at moving forward, having, I'm just concerned about like what kind of investments are we making?
No.
All right, gotcha. All right, thank you.
I think the terminology used was incorrect. It
Okay.
was just standalone. We took a look, they just didn't do the
Thank you
job.
for that clarification. Okay.
You will notice on the project, I just want to dive into beyond the ECC for a second. Sorry. Yeah. I'll try Teresa.
I just have a question, following up to Mrs. Guernsey. With Mr. Papa George, can you clarify, I believe the new state legislation wouldn't allow for that type of split unit, right? Doesn't the new state statute require more mechanical means of fresh air?
Fresh air. So, yes, so they do not assist with fresh air. They're not bringing outside air in. They're not filtered. All they circulate through filtration, but all they're doing is circulating the air in the classroom.
So to be clear, some of the ones that have been installed, recently, whatever, in the last 2 years, those have been more as temporary fixes for like an IEP or something like that, right?
Doctors know that type of stuff. And we have installed a few of them particularly at other schools like Jennings and White, where we wanted to give some additional space for classes to be able to move into on a particularly warm day. So we put a couple of additional ones into those sites.
So with that being said, and Mona Terrace not being air conditioned, and one of the rubrics for our ECC sites has always been HVAC and cooling, right? So to be clear, what are the regulations now with new state statutes if we were using that as a school? Wouldn't we not be able to use window units or ductless?
So currently, they are using window units in all the classrooms over there. We would look at ductless systems. We would also want to dive in and take a closer look at the BOAS system that's original to that building. Assuming there is one, we would have to dig in. Maybe the fans aren't working. We'd have to look at what would need to get the DOAS system up and running. We didn't dig into it yet, and we also believe that because of who the occupants are and the senior center in there, that it has been maintained. So we will dig into the records of the town to see what they've done.
But can you explain that that's not a full air conditioning system?
It's not a full air conditioning system. It is a window unit system. One of the things that we would recommend as a day one get through the door would be to swap the window units to a split unit system. Again, it's going to circulate the air in the classroom through a filtration, but not bring in fresh air. But the new split units are heat pump split units, so they would be able to provide heating and cooling to the classrooms. And again, as a temporary.
To be clear with the new legislation, would that be allowed as a new install?
As a new install for a temporary location, yes, but not as a long-term solution.
The
Thank
state
you.
doesn't require HVAC per se. I wish they did. But besides the ECC items, just drawing the attention to the items for discussion. In terms of actually beyond ECC, other specialized programming, we did hear that repeatedly. In regards to, obviously, we're using a lot of our classroom spaces now and support spaces to support specialized programming. So just to be thoughtful going forward and making sure that as we do the upcoming projects, that we actually build that space in terms of adding on to those projects. So I did put in 1 to 2 here as a proposal. That's to be determined. It's just a throw out number because we're conscious at Jennings and Dwight and Osborne Hill, as we build the appropriate spaces, we would probably be reclaiming some full-size classrooms that are currently being used for services. So there's a reclaim math there, that you didn't necessarily have to build them all. You could be reclaiming some. I did put on, we talked about consensus building on specialized programming space to Dwight, only because Jennings already does home to CLCs, and also hoping to alleviate pressure at Mill Hill. Or the utilization crunch that is there with the 2 CLCs, and then being a smaller building, they are overutilized. So we would be able to alleviate some of the pressure at Mill Hill by moving that 1 CLC at least, if not more, back to Dwight once that project was done. So being thoughtful, and also helping, Osborne Hill is also very crowded. So being able to build on the appropriate spaces, not only the full-size classrooms, but the actual support spaces that support those classrooms as well. So that was a piece of this conversation as well. Sorry, Mr. Peterson.
No, I mean, to tie into that a little bit, I was curious about the plans for Dwight in the sense that the option proposed by the facilities committee, so 378 schools, so we're looking at 18 classrooms. And currently we have 18 classrooms. 5 of them are being used for special purposes. In a renovation, in a new building, let's say, if that's the proposal. If we build the extra support spaces that we need, the small spaces, plus 18 classrooms, isn't that overbuilding for classrooms based on what our long range?
Depends on what's going to go in it, because if you're going to put more students for specialized programming in the building, then you would probably need more sections.
Well, I mean, I do see.
And of course, that's to be worked out in our ed specs.
Right. I mean, I think it's a reasonable idea to overbuild, for lack of a better term, Dwight, and bring CLCs back. Like that makes sense to me. I'm conscious of the fact that I think we're going to get pushback from other town bodies about building a school at the Dwight property that may be partially empty by the time it opens, based on our enrollment projections.
Usually empty.
I don't think that we're going to be able to fill up 18 classrooms of students. If we already are setting aside space in a renovated building for support spaces, for small spaces, do we have 18 classrooms worth of with the demand in that. I mean, I looked at, the 10-year last land projection we did. It tops out in 2031 at 255 kids.
So the idea is to build additional programming that would go in there, so you're gonna up that enrollment by having more programming there. But I hear your point. I mean, it has to be justified in our.
I think it's a hurdle we're gonna have to cross.
Right. Have to right size it for what we're gonna use it for.
Right, and I mean.
It's not gonna be a K-5 building, it might be a pre-K-5 plus specialized programming building. What is the building going to be used for? It's not just gonna be K-5 like.
But I mean, I think that's the thing we're gonna have to approach other town bodies with. And so I'm uncomfortable with the 378, just knowing where the enrollment has been going up there. But again, I understand that the purpose of bringing the CLCs, I get where you're coming from. It feels like a lot more detailed discussion to me.
Okay. Mr. Eason.
I have a question for Mr. Mancusi. Just out of curiosity, do we know about the breakdown for the ECC students on how many are transported by bus versus car? Do we know? Okay, I'd just be curious because Mrs. Flynn raised a concern about, saying we would be building a school at Jennings, but instead of 5, we'd be talking about 10 classrooms. I'd be curious to know because I know a lot of those children are picked up, especially the half-day ones from other programs and sent there. So I'm just curious to know if that would be, as we continue this discussion of a possibility, how impactful that would really be.
Can I just follow up on that very quickly? Because Ms. Jacobson, you said something earlier about geographic distribution of ECCs, which I'm very sensitive to. And actually, I thought the Mona Terrace, kind of having an east and west was a good idea. But I do think we need to be cognizant, not just of geographic distance, but of population density when we have these discussions.
So where are they coming from, at least at this moment in time? What are their feeder programs? So absolutely. I also want to follow up with the idea for ECC and your idea. So it's going to be 20 spaces minimum, not 10, but also you have to think about how a possibly.
Can you clarify that just for the public?
Sure. Like I said, a cluster of an ECC is 5 classrooms plus 5 additional support spaces. So 10 ECC classrooms is 20 spaces.
So you're saying you need 10 for every 5, you need 5 full-size classrooms?
No, 5 full-size classrooms, another full-size classroom for an OTPT, and then 4 additional small spaces.
Small spaces?
Yes.
So 5 is really 6 classrooms?
Yes, I'm just gonna say 10 spaces, 20 spaces, however you guys want to put it.
But space, I just wanted to clarify, spaces and classrooms are very different, size-wise and building project. So,
They're all instructional spaces in
yeah,
classroom.
but a classroom, it's a lot bigger square footage.
0.25 versus 0.5
It's a lot
versus
bigger
1.
square footage for a classroom than a small space.
Then, just as we're running into at Stratfield at this point, going to the 5th classroom at Stratfield, the ECC currently uses a classroom for their PE, adaptive PE. Now that classroom is going to the 5th classroom, so they're gonna need the gym. So again, you have to think about the impact of that many students. You're talking about maybe 600 kids in a building. You might need its own gym. You might need its own kitchen and APR. You're talking about having 2 schools on one site, so you have to double like a lot of things, not just the classrooms.
Half an ECC.
No, your idea is to have the full 10
No,
to 10.
Ward and Jennings.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, instead of doing the 5 and the 5, Ward is gonna stay no matter what, right? So instead of doing the 5 and the 5, you're saying do the 10 in one place. So just trying to understand the operations on the K-5 operations of that kind of volume is that we would probably have to look at a gym, and maybe I'll see another kitchen, an APR. You're basically gonna have 2 schools, not just the classrooms.
Understood.
Versus you can not do those things if you do 5 and 5.
But there are also some efficiencies. I mean, you don't need 2 full-size OTPT rooms.
You know?
I wouldn't think so.
Why not?
Okay, you don't need to be confrontational, Mrs. Jacobson. I think that one of our whole points of why we never spoke about when we were talking about a one-site ECC, now you're gonna need 3 gyms because it's 5 in 1. That was never part of the discussion. Part of it is supposed to be efficiencies that are achieved. You won't need 2 administrative suites. You can have 1 administrative suite. You could have, so.
That's not accurate though, because the K-5
Well,
population.
I look forward to the facility committee tomorrow having this discussion with inputs from staff, knowing that there are some board members who are very interested in this as an option.
No, absolutely, but, and I'm letting anyone talk about, the K-5 population would need its OT-PT room, and then the pre-K population would need its OT-PT room.
I understand that, but because you're bringing 2 ECCs to one site, if this happened, you now do not need 2 for each of the 5 clusters. You can have 1 for the 10 cluster.
I'll let Mr. Mancusi talk about that. I'm not sure because it's population, yeah.
In that situation that you just described, if you had a 2-site ECC versus a 3-site ECC, whether one site that you would only need 2 ECC OTPT rooms, but you would need an OTPT room at the elementary school for the K-5 population.
And do they already have one?
At Stratfield,
No, at Jennings.
Yes.
they have an OTPT room. Yeah.
Right, so that's not an additional thing. This is something, this one would be added for the,
For the preschool.
correct?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about sharing the space. I'm saying that where there were 2 in 2 separate buildings, we now could have the efficiency of only 1 space. It's not a doubling
We would
of
only need-
expectation.
For each site, we would need 1 OTPT.
That's what I was asking.
So the question I think really is how much student population can 1 OT-PT room carry? Right? What's the math around that? Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, it's something that you said in terms of bringing clusters together in terms of food service. Now, I get if we use Mona Terrace, we need food service in there. But if we do 10 at Jennings, why can't we use the Jennings cafeteria? Would there need to be a separate? I'm asking.
I don't think you need another cafeteria, and you probably need you wouldn't need a full-size gymnasium, obviously, for 3 and 4-year-olds. Similar to Ward, it's a smaller type, an all-purpose type room with, as long as the ceilings were a little bit higher, you could create a gym space that they could access and a recess space if it was raining. You build some.
No, I have no
You would-
with play space.
The cafeteria that currently exists would prepare food for the entire building.
I will just point out that Jennings is slated actually as a deficiency to have 1.0 OTPT. That's in the draft plan, so they are actually deficient in OTPT room. Mrs. Flynn.
Just a little bit of a follow-up to the discussions of Jennings, which I appreciate and think should be, follow down the rope. But I get a little concerned just when we're talking about the markers we currently have. Dwight is our next project and Jennings is concurrent after that. And we have heard at length the needs of our ECC today and the impact on those other buildings that we're utilizing today and tomorrow. And while I appreciate the need, or the desire for more efficiencies and 2 sites versus 3 and having all those conversations, which I think we should have, I do worry about, this is, I guess, through the chair to other board members, would that mean you were looking to swap Jennings and Dwight? Is that something, I just want to get a real idea of where we're going with this, because if we're going to have real robust conversations about that, I think it's really fair to the public and our community to say, we're looking at this and this is going to bump people that have been waiting. And I don't think I would support that just for that reason. I think that, I appreciate the years and the conversations that have gotten us here, but I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking on any decision we make at this table. And I think that, once we make a movement forward, there's going to be details, the cost of Mona Terrace, how much we want to invest. I don't think any of us wants to throw 3 phases on another building in a flood zone. So I think we're all at the same place, but I think my fear is that the fear of making a decision is going to make us go down every rabbit hole we see. And I just wanted to kind of say that, is anyone intending swapping on any of these building projects?
Teresa.
Swapping wasn't coming to mind.
Okay.
But what was coming to mind was the intriguing idea of Mona Terrace. But when I'm thinking of a stopgap, the idea of it being a few years to me is not realistic. I don't think whatever we do for the ECC is going to happen for a while, for a long time. And it might take until Dwight and Jennings are done. So having that space at Mona Terrace may be a great solution. But again, it's one of my concerns looking into that is that I think we need to be looking at that long-term option, that 10-year option.
Like I said, I appreciate that.
I'm not here today to say Dwight should come first, Jennings should come first. I'm not even at that point in the conversation. But I think that, obviously, you know where I'm at with Jennings. But yeah, I think having and working with a multi-site ECC, and if that incorporates Mona Terrace to alleviate some of those classrooms at Stratfield or whatever it may be, so that we can move kids because we have McKinley that's busting at the seams and we know we're going to have to move kids from McKinley out of there, and nothing to do with racial imbalance, so we can actually service our children. I think that is a good plan, but I think realistically, we're looking from a funding source and a realistic, that we don't have a money tree, we're looking at potentially, 7 years or more before we're actually where we're talking about hypothetically now. That's my opinion.
And I appreciate that. And I think what, I really want and what I appreciate after, being engaged in this process and with other town bodies in attendance is being prepared for those other meetings. And frankly, seeing new legislation come down that has a very large reimbursement for preschool space. We saw that with the HVAC grants. We were the first in line. We were the first in line for that. And I see no reason why we shouldn't be proactive to be the first in line for this. This has been an existing need in this town for going on as long as my kids have been alive. Let's get first in line.
So going on what Mr. Ace was saying, it almost sounds like the Mona Terrace is the big start. It's that foundation. We need to decide, is Mona Terrace a long-term, which I believe it is because the way things are done in this town. I see it maybe not as 10 years, but I see a 5 to 7 year potential. We need to use that as the foundation. The other stuff we can still have open discussion for, and I'm for it if that's what it needs. But we need to know about Mona Terrace because the longer we wait, the town could say, you know what, we can't wait anymore. We're going to take it over. Then we're going to lose that foundation, and then we're really back square one again.
All right, or we can just keep doing what we've been doing with ECC and put it where it fits and, move it around every couple of years and take a classroom here we don't have to do Mona Terrace. We can continue to do that process.
I just wanted to have one quick follow-up to Mrs. Flynn's query. I hear your point. I mean, there's no question Dwight has been waiting and there's no question Dwight has a need. I don't want us to lose track that a school like Osborne Hill has gotten the shaft for over a decade. They keep coming up on the waterfall, but then they need a patch of something and then they get moved past. And there's a huge argument to be made for that. To me, what's going to govern my decision is 20 years from now, what decisions did we make? What got done? And I'm interested, I'm not worried about the timeline right now, but I am interested that we do it right in a way that 20 years from now, we've created a system and a facility usage that makes sense. And with that goal, I would be, okay, ruthless is the wrong word, but I would be very highly rational about this is what's needed here. It's not about to, because if we're going to argue that someone's been waiting, then Osborne Hill should be at the top of the list. They have been waiting the longest for this. I'm not arguing for that. But if the argument is who's been waiting the longest, it's Osborne Hill. And so, but that doesn't mean that that is the rational way to go. I want us to look back later and do it the right way where we address the needs. And so I just wanted to respond to your point.
Let's just talk about, age of structure is the waiting of the time, but yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the HVAC conversation did kind of insert itself in there a little bit. I think, there was a shift that really and we've heard it from the crux of parents and our administrators and our teachers, that on a day-to-day basis, our staff and our students are in these buildings. And addressing that HVAC and I so appreciate the conversation, the 20 years, we all want to look back at these conversations, but I also worry about the next year and 2 years that people are in these buildings and, need clean and fresh air.
And never mind our high school students that are having to wait until 2030 and 2031, so.
And every conversation that we delay another facilities decision, we're fully cementing that we're just not making any decisions.
Well, except they'll have a waterfall. I mean, we're still moving ahead with our HVAC.
I agree.
Still have a schedule for that, so.
Mrs. Guernsey.
I'm just like thinking about this, the school facilities and wondering, a question for the facilities committee is, did you discuss at all central office facility? Has that ever been a part of these conversations about a building project? And
Sorry, we didn't talk about central office.
I'm not suggesting that would be a good idea to, it just didn't have to come up. Okay.
So random note, based on age of structure, one of the things that struck me on this, on the new draft is, there's nothing for Tomlinson. Talk about our oldest building in town. Not in terms of small spaces, changing configuration. Do they really have no programmatic needs in that building?
The principal, they actual minor requests and some of what he was asking for, we're gonna be able to do out of operating. Really no big change to.
It just surprises me based on the age and that the school floods, and we know that it's an area of focus for maintenance.
The administrator, yes. The administrators came in and, what made it into this plan is what would be a capital or capital non-recurring, but they certainly shared, lots of brought up a lot of things, were like, that's the maintenance operating budget project, tier 1, tier 2, 3. So it was great because that can now get updated, but it's not something that got.
No, I'm very familiar with the
Yeah.
tier project. If this was their opportunity to make major requests for reconfiguring their space or adding new space, I was surprised to not see anything. And high schools too, it's a very elementary focused program and we understand why. But I would have thought, given the opportunity, our building administrators would have made it.
I mean, I will say Dr. Hatzis did ask for us to build a performing arts center. So, and that can fit the entire, like we might have in Bridgeport and Westport and, we've taken it under advisement for and connected him with the Arts Commission. Mr. Asa.
Yeah, so switching over to Dwight.
Sure.
So I know the recommendation here is number 4 on your form. And we've talked about the idea of why, we've said it publicly, why we thought that it would need to be a new build versus a renovation. And I know that we have seed money coming up, whatnot. I guess to the chair, are we expected as a board to make a decision now as to definitively a rebuild or a renovate and add or like we've done with schools in the past? I know my concerns have been when we open up the walls and whatnot. But since we haven't actually gotten to the point where we've done real investigation and real drilling into the walls and whatnot, I guess how do we go about this in a way that if we find out that a major renovation and add could be much more cost effective and done right, and we address all of those potential things?
So, we have our recommendation in here. We are going to look at renovation like new and get some details, and I can let Mr. Papa George. There's 3 different categories. There's new, renovate like new, renovate, right? And that renovate like new is in order to get the reimbursement, the higher reimbursement, you have to demonstrate that, new would actually be less than the renovate. So there's all, you know how the state is, there's like all these different definitions and things. So you can actually.
Could you explain that? I don't understand that.
Okay, so, renovate like new is a category of renovations, and Mr. Papageorge, if I say anything wrong, jump in. But in order to get the higher reimbursement to renovate like new, which means basically it has the same useful life, you're going so far down into it practically that it has the same useful life as a new build. But you have to demonstrate that building new would actually cost less than the renovation, which in this case, it might actually be. So do you want to speak to renovate like new versus renovate? Or did I catch it right?
It's all a matter of the life expectancy and what the cost layouts are gonna be from the state.
So does the sorry, are you okay?
That's okay.
So does the reimbursement higher on renovate like new if the cost of new is less because it's costing you more, so they're helping offset that?
Yeah, you can get a higher reimbursement actually on new if it's less. So there's 3 different categories, but yes, the lowest reimbursement is just new, right? Renovate like new is almost as good as new, but you're getting a higher reimbursement because you can demonstrate that it costs less than doing a renovation. Like think about different parts of our state. If there's a lot of ledge or something, it might actually just be cheaper to build it new somewhere else than the renovation. So they do have that category. Plus, I told you, or you've been informed, or I think you know, it hasn't been signed by the governor yet, but adding early childhood care space, which is just phenomenal to an elementary school project, whether you're building new or a renovation, they're giving a 15% increase to your reimbursement rate for that portion of the building primarily used for the early childhood. So the state's in a desperate early childhood situation. I'm thinking that they're hoping that will incentivize districts and towns to add space when they can and when it's available. Obviously, it hasn't been signed yet, but that's incredibly helpful to a town like Fairfield that we don't get, amongst the highest reimbursement rates for our projects. So that also is playing into some of our decisions and ensuring that, for buildings, how can we maximize the reimbursement rates that we're hoping to be able to share with the town board, with you guys and with the town boards. But Mr. Issa, yeah?
Yeah, do you still have the
No,
floor?
go ahead.
At the moment.
Okay.
I just lost my thought.
Have some Kathy.
Okay, so we're talking, sorry. With regard to the Dwight property, as we've talked about, not going a 504 route and everything, where do we stand, or is this still to come with regard to the waste, to the sewer, to the septic? If we are to keep it at the 378, and possibly add the rooms or whatever direction we go in, do we know what the cost would be to do a new septic?
So we've been working with the town's engineering department. They have not been able to finalize numbers or put numbers on it yet. One of the downfalls of it that was brought to my attention recently is they do not believe there is a natural flow from Dwight down to the treatment center. So that automatically raises the price because now you're talking about a pumping station somewhere along the line.
Trying for converting to sewer.
To convert to sewer, yes. And then also the cost of for a mile sewer line install. So it's not a very low price tag. And with the pumping station, it almost.
Sorry, my question was regarding the septic that's there.
Yep.
Like that's an old system. So
No
would
matter
we be
what-
talking about a simple replacement in the same location and fields and all that stuff? Or would we be talking about having to come to a whole new method of doing septic system, come a long way or not?
So as we all know, the septic system is not the best up there. We have issues with it constantly. It would be something that would have to be redesigned, reconfigured, and possibly even relocated based on what is found when they start looking. As you know, there's a lot of ledge up there. So systems have improved since that system was installed, but.
Even if we did a new build, we'd still be looking potentially at a new septic system.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it is the administration's recommendation. It has been to us for a long time to build new at that location. That's why it's on the waterfall at the higher price when we were talking about redistricting. So I think that you guys are firm and it should be built new.
As you mentioned with the different tiers for reimbursement, one of the things that would bring up a renovate like new for Dwight is the actual building location itself on the property. You have property line behind it, you have a property line to the right. The only place to really go would be out into the septic area currently and also up to where the playground is, which is all ledge. As you all know, the playground is way up above the building. So now you're talking about ledge. So there's a lot that would be considered for that location as opposed to a build as new or new build on possibly the upper part where we have the flat playing field now and then remove that playing field down below it. So
Can I continue my questions here then? So on a build new, you'd in theory, what I'm hearing is that we'd be building the building in a new location and not disrupting current activities. So school would continue to go on while a new building was being built. Then when it's done and the CO is transferred, kids move into the new building and the old one is raised.
Anything else, Mr. Asa?
Not at the moment.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Can I clarify something about the sewer, because in discussions, and we've been talking about this for years, you and I thought part of the point, you were talking about the flow down to that station. I thought part of the point about putting it in the upper field was to connect it to the sewer lines that are behind it, which implies that there are sewer lines that already flow down to treatment center.
we are approximately 3 to 6 miles from the closest sewer line, even up on the upper hill. There's no sewer lines on Congress. There's, Burr was a very unique building. When they built that, they were able to tie into an existing line, which was only approximately 1 mile to 2 miles away from it. But even the town-owned firehouse on Congress Street is on a septic system. So
I'm sorry, I thought we talked about tying in and trying to get neighbors to participate in getting hooked up to sewer because there was a line that was closer.
We talked about, price of a septic or sewer line up that way would be reduced by neighbor tie-in and neighbors wanting to be a part of that system. Having conversations with the town's engineer, they don't know what, because there, as you all know, I'm sure from the town meetings, there's a lot of projects heading towards the treatment center down there. What would the additional flow be? What would cause that? So there would be a lot of concern and questions that would come up with tying in other than a single building or a couple of buildings, so that they're really saying that they wouldn't put the neighbor buy-in on the table as an option until they can fully address that as well.
I mean, it really feels like from this discussion, there's a very high bar to hurdle if we want to hook up to sewer at Dwight.
That is the way they are pushing it.
Okay.
One quick follow-up. Apart from the Dwight property at all, is there, and I'm just ignorant of this, sorry, is there a town interest or intention to grow the sewer system in terms of that area? So that this might be something that's happening, or there's no intention of doing so?
Not according to the POCD.
Nothing on the 10-year plan.
Nothing.
There's so much sewer infrastructure needs due to decades of neglect and not, that a lot of them, according to some of you watched some of the P&Z meetings, a lot of them are leaking. That's adding to more issues at the plant, the processing plant. I mean, some of the language has been around. We need to fix the pipes we've got in the areas that we've got before expanding. So, I mean, look, there has been advocacy to expand it, right? So that other people could tie in and for Dwight. And I'm not going to say there hasn't been advocacy around adding sewer in those areas, but as of sitting here this evening, we're pretty clear they're not going to add. And I know that was part of the estimate that we have on our waterfall. That cost did include a portion of running a line up Reading Road, but it's not looking like that's going to happen as part of this project, and we probably just need a new septic. Anyone else on any of the other buildings? One of the neat things about, I kind of love this project, Walter Fitzgerald. So we made them look like the other schools. They had a paragraph. But one of the interesting things that came up with the administrator is that they really don't have a technology or like a tech room like the other schools have. And there's that space for those of us that toured it in the back there that used to have the gym equipment and some storage and stuff. So I asked about library media. They really don't have library media. So an idea for around them, which I think I'm like kind of super psyched about for Walter Fitzgerald, is some sort of a library media / technology makerspace back there, so they can actually take some of those higher level computer classes like CADs and things like that, that will help them. So and bring books, like actually be able to check out library books and things like that. So that was a really nice item that was added by having the student. I think of other, besides Dr. Hatz wanting a performing arts center for the town. Julie?
I think the biggest takeaway I had was that all the administrators came in, they're utilizing their spaces the best and then some, because of, for lack of a better word, overcrowding due to ECC and other things that 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, it just wasn't any radar, right? I think it was interesting to hear that the small spaces are needed, whereas before when we were designing schools, we wanted full-size classrooms. The way you're gonna start designing schools in the future, are you still gonna have your classrooms, but there's gonna be a wing of support wing, if you wanna call it for a better word, that you're gonna have your OT, your PT, your one-on-ones, and instead of like a chalkboard, it's a small conference table where they can teach 3 or 4 kids and then have meetings with the parents, have IEP meetings and things like that. That was the biggest takeaway. And it was just, you're still teaching the ABC 1, 2, 3, how you're doing it and what added services you need for it.
Yeah, changing times. Mr. Peterson?
That's something that's been weighing on my mind for quite some time. And I think that it is ultimately going to be incumbent on this board to do a lot of education with other town bodies and people in the town, because I think there is a very well ingrained idea of what education is. You sit in a classroom, you look at it, there's a teacher up front. I don't think it's well understood the sea change that's taken place in education over the last couple of decades. And I think whatever we decide here, and I know I got a little and I may still be like that, but I think we do need to get together and advocate for what the current educational standard of care is, which I think is not well understood by people not in this industry and not in this room. And so that's going to be an uphill battle, no matter what we decide. We've known that for years about the ECC. We need to tell people in the public what it is and why we have it. And I know that everyone around this table wants the best for that program, but it's when we get out there, when we get on social media, it's very important for people to understand that things are different than they might expect.
And you'll see that the principals were pretty thoughtful in terms of updating this plan from what it currently exists in terms of their spaces. So to echo Mr. Lee, sometimes there's been a sea change around lots of tiny spaces to, yes, some tiny spaces for those individual needs that we know that we have, like psych, speech, and whatnot. However, bigger spaces that multiple people can be moved in and out, can be shared, multi-purpose, like you can have 3 or 4 different, where appropriate, of course. Different days, different people are there, right? So that's a big, the SEL rooms or Zendens, 10 years ago when we toured, or, those are in your book as SEL, 0.5 SEL rooms, because that's really what they are. And that is a change as well. So again, big message from the administrators is build the spaces to serve the student population versus K-5 spaces being supplanted for those spaces, right? So just build what you need, for that. So, go, Mr. Kress.
Well, and be mindful of the location of the spaces. So for a random example, if you have a faculty bathroom by the gym on the other side of the school, may seem like it's not a big deal, but if a teacher needs to find coverage, go all the way to the other side of the school, it takes time. So just little optimization things that we can do in terms of having a wing and location of things, the size of the classrooms, having certain things near each other. We're all, pretty resounding comments from almost every school.
Well, I know in our tours of Stratfield, for example, the distribution of classrooms of the support spaces in that building has never been optimal. We've all seen that with our own eyes. I'm sorry other people had their hands. I just wanted to add that.
That's okay. They're just lucky they have so many of them at Stratfield. The one thing I do want to get the board's input on terms of the value is Appendix A, the building utilization chart. And that these are not page numbers, so it's really towards the end. Appendix A, where you get to the roof, capital water. It looks this purple chart. There is a current one in the one right now. It's been somewhat updated. I wanted to get your input on it. I think it's helpful to the public or town boards to have this in here. It's not a state requirement to have this in here. But it also bothers me in the sense that the minute, like a year or two after we vote on it, if one program moves, the chart changes, right? It's like, is there value to having this in here, or should we just like not? Like in terms of utilization, how they're being used, should we pare it down? Should it just have like functional capacity and operational capacity? Or is it helpful to see it's got a CLC, it's got a TLC, it's got pre-K, and just make this something, it's an appendix, so it can get updated, but I just want to know what we feel in terms of, is this valuable to anyone besides us? Or do you think it would be valuable to anyone else? I find it has value, but I also can see it being like, changes, it could change every year. So do you, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly?
I agree with you. I think it's valuable because I think someone looking at it, the one thing I would say, because we can't assume that everyone who is looking at this is well-versed in the things that we're doing. I can't believe I'm saying this to you, Mrs. Jacobson, but I think you need some definitions. I think you need to define functional, you need to define operational so that someone understands the meaning between those two columns. You know, just like really thinking of this is for somebody else to be, or, you know, someone who's brand new to the board, you know, who's looking at it and isn't versed in these terms. I think that would be very helpful.
Like CLC as well, TLC, like
Sure.
any acronym?
Absolutely.
Okay. Sorry, anyone else on this chart before we move on? Mr. Lee?
I think though, I think it should be noted, I mean, this normally doesn't get touched once everyone votes on it. We're talking changes every year, you know?
Just the appendixes.
The appendix should be updated
Yes,
as needed. It shouldn't.
it would be. Mrs. Flynn?
I only took note when Ms. Jacobson was saying this is one of the things she wanted input on, and when Mr. Peterson was speaking, I was thinking this is kind of a good start off to that, you know, how we are explaining really, I think what Mr. Lee said really eloquently, that, you know, the assumption has always been we're building K-5 buildings, and we have been. And the reality is that our K-5 buildings are serving pre-K-5 with special programming. And this tells that story, I think with more definition, but I think that these are going to be the documents similar to what we saw in the budget process with really explaining special programming, explaining, you know, enrollment versus where children are, our universe. I think this shows our universe much better and kind of articulates a little bit of where we're going to definitely need to go with other town bodies in our community to explain this. So I take that, I actually take that very much to heart, that that's going to be part of our work.
No, and I think this is very valuable. I wouldn't mind updating it every year, or getting an update of it every year for that exact reason. But we also, it's going to be on us to explain this chart to people. Like that's the thing, we can put definitions in it, and I think that would be great for people who are really self-starters and interested in breaking it down, but we're going to.
Some people just want the numbers.
We're going to need to translate, and we're going to, you know, nobody knows what a TLC is.
The last thing.
FairTV's been.
The last thing is, I will say, Papa George and I editing this document, I will say that inside of here is a lot of photos from previous years, multiple layers of track changes, I believe. I did think it was important, just me, I know that I value red lines so that everyone in the public can see what's in there now, what are we proposing to change. However, for June, it would probably behoove all of us to have literally a fresh new document that's retyped, that's not from 2012, edited to get rid of it. I just think the formatting was really hard. Would it be okay to just have a clean read going forward, or do we need everything redlined again, or can we be working off of this? In other words, I'd like to retype the clean read from scratch. This is a very edited half of the stuff, a lot of the stuff is photos, it's not actually typed, it's cut and paste. So is a clean read fine going forward? You want the edits?
I think a clean read is fine, and I think therefore it behooves us to hold on to this so that anyone trying to ask you, but what was that before or anything like that, then it's on us to keep the historical document. And because otherwise I agree with you, I think a clean read would be helpful.
All right, anyone else on this?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I apologize, I stepped up to ask something about the sound system, but, so if you covered this, tell me. With the idea of universal pre-K, where did that factor in our long-range plan, if at all, or in the discussions? Because the idea is that when we're done with this, as Mrs. Maxick says, we have a plan that years later, we can look back and say this board did a good job. I know we don't have a crystal ball.
Can I answer that? So there's never gonna be a world, and don't say, I guess I just shouldn't say never. The General Assembly is never gonna say every single district, Hartford to Fairfield to Greenwich, you have to build enough pre-K space to offer a seat. What the proposals around that has been is that you would be able to partner with the private partners, with the YMCA's, with the Wegmans and stuff like that. So I don't think, even if we had universal pre-K, I'm not sure, and Mr. McCusey can fill me in if you think I'm wrong, that they would expect the public school system to fill all of those seats in alone, because imagine a city.
I'm just laughing at your idea of the state and what they do, because
Well, I'm just saying, like, forget us.
It doesn't
I
make
mean,
sense.
imagine Bridgeport or Hartford, all of a sudden they need, what, 8,000 new seats? How are they gonna build that? Or whatever it might be, do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, there would always be community sites.
Community sites.
That would need to be
Partners.
partners in the endeavor. There's no way possible to have universal pre-K in public school buildings in the state of Connecticut. It's just,
Just don't have it, they don't have the space. I mean, I did bring up like, hey, you want to be proactive, you could put 1 or 2 in every building if we had that, right? In every neighborhood school, and then you're, planning for that in the future, but that's not a popular idea. Around.
Sounds like you guys discussed it and the administration is in agreement. I appreciate it.
Again, never say never, but yeah, Mrs.
One
Maxey.
other just quick question. Someone else brought it up. I don't remember who, but why isn't central office in this document?
It wasn't in the original.
Right. It wasn't my idea. Somebody else said it, but I think Mrs.
Like,
Guernsey said, I thought.
Office have deficiencies that we should address?
No, can I speak to this?
Sure.
So we've talked about this in facilities going back way to when we restarted it, and the idea before we got into any of this that you've been now. And the idea was floated around of relocating central office, not because of deficiencies, but to get out of leasing a building. So that I know, for example, I'm pushing for Jennings to be, a bigger build. Like, for example, hypothetically, I'm saying a bigger build to fit all of the second site ECC. Well, would Dwight be a good fit to add some space there if we're doing a new build and have our central administration located there and no longer have to lease this building and get out of here? Because we don't own this building and we pay for it. So I think there's been discussion and interest from board members over the years on what that cost benefit analysis looks like.
I'm just thinking about for this plan, so it would only be a waterfall or a capital project if the board decided we want to add on to just Osborne Hill or Jennings or Dwight. X amount of square footage for central office administration. Otherwise, it wouldn't go in here because this is a statement of needs, like if we were staying in there. So I guess we can talk about that tomorrow, and we can talk about it tomorrow at the facilities committee meeting in terms of central office as well. I don't know how much square footage is needed, that kind of thing, but yeah.
In terms of process, if we're talking about this as a draft, the first read is going to come
June 11th,
June 11th.
unless you'd like to have a special in between.
I'm all for more meetings.
I know you
know
are.
where I am for
I
more
know
meetings.
you are.
So let's, more meetings. In terms of input from the public, I know it sounds like you got input from building administrators and you got input from, administration, but did you have a lot of public participation in the committee meetings? Do we expect there to be a round of, I don't know that people understand what this means.
You don't think they understand what a draft facilities plan is?
I don't think that they understand the potential consequences of what this is. And I am curious how we can, it's always a question, how do we engage the public better? But I mean, this is something that I think a lot of people in town would be interested in if they understood the importance of it. And one of the things that I don't want to do is come out with a plan and then people come back at us and say.
So yeah, the PTA council, they're to get our messages out. We have this meetings. I mean, I'm more than happy to ask Mr. Testani if Rachel could get a message out to the community that we've had our first draft, please engage. I mean, there's only so much.
I know, and we've been there, but I just, it's something that I would want some public participation or at least notice of. And that's a concern of mine.
Just to follow up, PTA council is always open and has been since the beginning of the year that if something does come up, obviously this year has been a little, racial imbalance was a topic, and it has been an open invitation that if anything was to come up at a meeting, that they would welcome our chair, our superintendent attends every meetings where they're, but for engagement of the public. So if you're saying if that's a location, that is one piece of the puzzle for you.
Sorry. Yeah.
To your point, I think, and to Mr. Peterson's point, I think our communications director does a phenomenal job. Just like we did during redistricting, a blast with a link to the website and whatnot.
And a link to this plan.
Yeah, I would say from PTA council, while I appreciate that, I think the majority of people in town don't know what PTA council is. So I think a blast from the district.
Yeah, but I mean, distributing through that system.
Understood, but I
Building
think from the district
Yeah.
and with Parent Square, I think you're gonna get a lot more bang for your buck.
Oh, yeah, no, and then we can put a link to the plan and, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the reason why we're having, yeah, Mrs. Maxicanelli.
So this wouldn't be a facility, but we did have that recent tour of the other part of Giant Steps.
Yep.
Is that a factor in any conversation or,
Not for us,
I guess then why did we tour it?
to get a sense. I mean, there's, the stairs there, there's no elevator. It would be.
We have occasionally talked about it as a potential location for central office.
I don't know what they are planning on doing with that, but not for us. That's not for, ECC or whatever at this point.
The tour was wishful thinking.
Well, I mean, yeah, but also we want to do our due diligence, like looking at that space, it'd be possible. We looked at the rental space, looked at Mona Terrace, trying to just make sure that we've thought of or
I
tried.
could think of plenty for there, but the point being, we're not getting any hint from the town, unlike Mona Terrace, we're not getting any hint from the town to dream.
I mean,
Oh, the first
I
selectman
think
did
it's totally
offer
open, yeah. I think there-
possibility, but
Yeah. That would be really, really a lot of money and also, our waterfall is full. Pretty much. We do have some money on our waterfall for ECC, 887,000 later on in the year, so we've talked about what's on the waterfall now for that. Trying to get a firm number on the FEMA cap, which we think is somewhere between 3 and 3.5 million. Not sure, not official number, but around there. In terms of being good fiscal stewards and figuring out how much money that, would this board be comfortable actually putting into a temporary location, right? So everyone's gonna have to grapple with that. If we move forward with that idea, if you have a FEMA cap, does that mean you want to use all of it or not? So we just have to grapple with those numbers. So I appreciate the input. What I'm walking away with, and Mr. Lee and Mr. Krasnoff, we've got the Toll Jennings notion of the second site. We've got the central office discussion to have. We've got any follow-up. That's pretty much the only two things that I have down here, right? And getting just obviously more answers on Mona Terrace, but there were no other buildings that you had any other questions on, right?
Aside from tomorrow's facilities meeting, when's your next one? Is there another one prior to the June meeting?
There likely will be.
Okay, so that if we had some, we should, like, obviously haste post haste and not by tomorrow morning, but there's still an impetus to get those to you quickly because there might be another meeting.
Yeah, what to me?
If there were other aspects of the building
Yes, but
beyond what you just stipulated.
Yeah, if you have them now, that would be great. If not, and also just know that I didn't go through this with a fine tooth comb for commas and quotation marks or anything else, grammar, spelling. I understand. That's actually a photo. Okay. Actually wasn't typed. Hence the clean read notion. I hear you. So if you have any of the errata or whatever, please, I'm gonna rely on somebody else to do that. Mr. Asa.
Are you proposing that you're gonna draft this clean read?
Mr. Papa George and I have been working on it. So no, I'm sure central office will just retype it, so that it's,
So through you to
or
the
someone.
superintendent, is there bandwidth for that at the
and if
moment?
not, I will do it myself.
we would have to delegate someone to take on that. Mr. Papa George is not obviously equipped to do that.
I'm open to the idea of a clean read. I'm just hesitant to put more on staff at this time.
If
I
I need
don't.
to do it, I will do it.
A lot of work.
I'll prove
Yes, it is. Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for your input in the conversation ongoing. I know that our facilities highly important to our community, to everyone on this board. And looking to make the best decisions going forward, so keep in touch on that. Next agenda item. Agenda now. I do.
Racial imbalance plan update.
Racial imbalance plan update. So, I'll start briefly and just say this was meant to be a racial plan amendment draft this evening originally. For members of the public, as you know, in March, we were before the State Board of Education on our racial imbalance plan and not having a concrete plan as of October. They asked us for an amendment. So tonight's agenda item originally was racial imbalance plan amendment, a draft of that to go over with the board and the public. The General Assembly did pass a bill in both the House and the Senate, somewhat putting, I guess they're calling, a pause on racial imbalance until July 1, 2025. So this has turned into an update, as we presume at this time that we no longer need to submit an amendment on our racial imbalance plan. That's the short story, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Testani because I know he's been trying to get in touch with CSDE to get confirmation on the understanding.
So I was able to speak with the attorney at the Connecticut State Department of Ed this afternoon. And the response was, well, my question was, does this mean we no longer have to present an amended plan by July 1 to the State Board of Ed? And he believes that is the case, but we'll confirm with the commissioner and have a response to me sometime by the end of the week.
Go ahead.
Just, and I don't know, through the chair to Mr. Testani, can you speak to the value of a pause?
It's a good question. I guess it will buy us some time to sort out some of this facilities stuff that we've discussed for almost 2 hours. I think bigger question, and we presented that when we were there on March 6th, was number one, we're in a facilities crunch in terms of space at McKinley School, first and foremost, and some other schools. And a lot of it has to do with being very conscientious in creating good programs for students to be able to stay within their neighborhood school for specialized instruction and not have to go elsewhere. So I think that does help us as we figure out what we can do to alleviate some space issues at McKinley, which could be moving kids, as we discussed, possibly to Stratfield, if we can remove the tension of the ECC that is causing us to have basically 6 less classrooms at Stratfield this year. So I think the pause has some value. I don't know if that pause will then turn into a full-blown disbandment of the law. That could be phase 2 of this. I'm not sure if that's the intention, but it does give us some time. Rather than have to say what we could possibly do, we may have more definitive answers based on what this board decides to do with Mona Terrace or some other facility that would alleviate and open up space at Stratfield School.
Just some of the media attention around this. I just wanted to clarify. I know there's been some confusion. Some news pieces, some media pieces that had this board, just for clarity, this board stopped talking about redistricting last October, almost 7 months ago. We passed a resolution, voted on it, and that's what was presented to the state board. I know some of the media things have been talking about stopping redistricting or whatever, and that's, people are thinking that we're still redistricting. So just for purposes of being clear with the public, we have not discussed redistricting for almost 7 months. Mr. Peterson.
What? public to be clear though, like Mr. Testani said, that this may need to be on the table, not necessarily for racial balance purposes, but for facility utilization rebalancing,
Of course.
which has always been a thing that has been in our sight. So I don't want people to think it's done, it's gone, it's never coming back, because we still have work to do. And it's great if we can find space for McKinley kids at Stratfield, if it's close. We have other areas of tension to deal with that may not necessarily be addressed by this plan. But I don't want people to think that we are not, that we're taking our eye off it and we're going away permanently. I don't think we can do that.
Thank you.
Want to make that point.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on. All right, first read, grade 6 to 8 ELA curriculum. All right. Yes.
5-minute recess. just-
Yes, we can
okay.
have a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
That's okay.
We'll try to make things work. Can I got one? I don't want to bring up longer term problems, but independent of that, we can have that discussion. I think it's going to need to happen, especially if we, what I think is going to happen even if we do a new bill.
Ready.
I totally still like home and like pieces and everything, and I'm like reading, I'm like, oh, this is a good one. So, it's like. I love it, those. I think it's, sometimes it's a rabbit hole. We try not to make it rabbit hole. Yes, no, I'm not about being too prescriptive here. But it's fun, like, looking at the reading, and then I look them up and I'm like, oh, I've never read that before.
a lot of clarity in terms of what we're expecting to see in our 16 proposed curriculums. I also want to thank a couple of people. Colleen Bannock is here, as is Karen Shaughnessy, representing our administrators from the middle school. They are here. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your continued support. I, of course, want to thank Julie. She truly led the charge on this. Lisa Oliver, who is our program director for social studies, Justine Lasala, who is our program director for science. I do want to thank all of our middle school principals and assistant principals as well for their continued support, as well as obviously our curriculum designers, our ELA 6-8 teachers, our language arts specialist teachers, as well as our science social studies teachers at the middle school. This truly was an effort that required a lot of input, and we appreciate their time and their dedication to get this right. So I do want to highlight for you, or just review very quickly, this most recent revision process to give everyone a sense of the steps that we took to gather as much input as possible. So after receiving feedback from the board, the program directors, Julie Heller, Lisa Oliver, and Justine Lasala, spent a considerable amount of time looking at each other's units. They looked at the ELA units that were drafted. They looked at the science and the social studies units to determine where meaningful cross-disciplinary work could occur. So this happened a little bit easier, I would say, in the area of science because science went through the curriculum review cycle, so we know which units are there, right? And will be remaining. Social studies was a little more challenging because there is that unknown in the next couple of years that things may change. So even though you are going to see a lot of alignment with social studies, we had to make sure that the units that we created those connections with were the ones that would most likely remain. We did the best we could. The middle school then and ELA teams, the middle school ELA teams and administrators came together then on April 2nd. April 2nd was a full professional learning day. Students were not in school, and this was the perfect opportunity to re-engage after we took a look at the units to see where those cross-disciplinary connections were. So they spent the day working on that. Then comes April 23rd, and we then invited the science and the social studies teachers to then provide input on what was drafted, okay? Based on everyone's input, the final edits and revisions were made. And then Julie sought approval once we did that before we sent it to you from the ELA teachers to make sure it was good to go. And that was on Friday, April 28th, right down to the last minute at 5:50. So we're grateful, so grateful for everybody's time in this. This was a hard thing to pull together, but I believe that this new proposed curricula will definitely serve the needs that we have here in Fairfield Public Schools. So I want to refer back to your feedback, and I want to summarize and highlight the input that we received from you all, what we did consider. Well, we considered it all, but I will say there are things that we were able to deliver on and some that we were not able to, and I want to give you some background on that. So first and foremost, the interdisciplinary learning. Across grades 6 through 8, you're going to notice there are 10 units that are aligned with social studies. 1 unit is explicitly aligned with science, and then there are 3 units that are aligned to both science and social studies. And then, of course, we have our last unit in grade 8, which is a Shakespeare unit to better prepare students for 9th grade. Julie's going to review some of those details in a few minutes in the next couple of slides. Now we come to rigor. So embedded in this proposed curricula are opportunities for a couple of things. There are opportunities now for more full-length texts. There is a minimum of 2 per grade level. Some grade levels have more. But additional texts have been identified in order to build that robust text set so that students are building vocabulary and background knowledge. You'll also notice there's more rigor in terms of the vocabulary expectations. This is something that was mentioned several times. You're going to notice that we more explicitly outline the academic words that students will see across disciplines. Words such as compare and analyze, those words that they see in many different contexts. And then you're also going to notice some content-specific vocabulary, such as culture. These are things that students will be working through. And that brings us then to, I guess, the schedule considerations for collaboration. So our middle schools are looking forward to this collaboration. In their schedules, we're going to use the team model for this purpose, for that cross-disciplinary work. In the units, there's going to be opportunities for the ELA teachers to work alongside the science social studies teachers who are planning, so they can support the projects and vice versa. The essential questions and the corresponding enduring understandings of the units have also been further revised in order to reflect some of the science and social studies content that students are learning. It was also mentioned to ensure that we had those conversations in those transition grades. And I want to assure you that we started these conversations last summer and during the school year as well. So we've had those grade level articulation discussions on what skills and experiences students need to have before transitioning to the next grade. We sort of call them our literacy promises. And as we develop our implementation guides, this is going to be something that will be present in them. We're going to share some specifics about those on the following slides, but I wanted you to know that these definitely were a consideration, and we really hopefully captured what the wish list was. Now, the last item is one that was considered, but ultimately it was not the desired outcome of the teachers or the administration. Now, we knew this was a request from at least 2 of our board members, but we're hoping with the increased rigor and opportunities for the interdisciplinary learning and the collaborative work that's going to take place, that the board will consider maintaining the exact same model. We've only found 2 other schools in the state of Connecticut that offer an additional course in ELA. And we also have looked at the research surrounding that decision, and that was also a contributing factor for us. So the goal was to try to maintain the work that was already put in place by the curriculum designers and enhance it to make sure that we are honoring the expectations of the board. But ultimately, what we want to do is make sure that we are being able to meet the needs of all of our students. Students were at the center of our decisions.
So before we talk a little bit about the structure of the units of each of the grade level courses, just want to spend a little bit of time talking about text complexity. This is central to much of what we do in our discipline. And there's a lot of research. There's some updated research that exists. If you were to go to Appendix A on the Common Core State Standards site, you would find about a 10-page document that deals with some of the current research. And so they've broken down the ability to determine text complexity into these 3 prongs that you see on the slide before you. And those 3 prongs are qualitative considerations, quantitative considerations, and reader and task. So I'll talk about qualitative first. So qualitative considerations are those measures such as the list that you see before you. Those include things like the structure of the story or the form of that particular narrative, the language clarity and the conventions, knowledge demands of the student, what do they bring to the text, levels of meaning and purpose that are embedded in the text, the student motivation for reading, the experiences that student brings to the text, and why we're asking that student, the students to read that particular text and what tasks they're asked to complete as a result of that. So here's text that we use in 8th grade. It's a very common text that is in schools across the United States. It was designed by L.E. Wiesel, who won the Nobel Prize in 1986. And how many of you, just show of hands, have read this book? So majority of you. So this particular text, you might be interested to know would be, if you were just to look at the quantitative factors. I don't know if we can show this. You would see that this particular text comes in with a Lexile level of 590. Lexile is one of the quantitative tools for measuring text complexity, and a 590 would put this book in the grade 2-3 band. Clearly, this is not a book that students in grades 2 and 3. So that's really why we have to also pay attention when we're thinking about text complexity to those qualitative considerations that we just went over. This is very serious subject matter. The text organization is challenging. The subject matter is difficult. There's a lot of cultural knowledge, background knowledge that goes into understanding this text fully, and then what we do with this. So all of the considerations for this text, despite the Lexile level, actually puts us at a text that's used appropriately. It's in grade 7 and up. We use it for 8th grade students. And just a word about Lexiles. So and the Lexile or the quantitative measure, there are other tools that are used to establish the quantitative qualities of a text, but they are really looking at sentence length and frequency of words. That's really a brief definition of Lexile. And when we went back and looked at all of the texts that we're putting before our students in each of the 3 grade levels, we did consider those Lexiles. And in grade 6, 72% of the texts that all students are reading are at or above that Lexile band. 88% of those texts for grade 7 students fall within that band, and 80% of the texts for grade 8 students. The reason grade 8 is a little bit lower is because the 3 texts that push that number down are Night by Elie Wiesel, and then also his acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize, and The Giver. It's also a challenging text in different ways. It's also a little bit below that band level.
Thank you. The next slide is speaking to the conversations that we had when we gathered our 5th and 6th grade teachers together. There were several conversations related to the literacy skills, as well as the personal development skills that students right
Recording in
without being
progress.
supported by technology at times. It was also cited that students' organizational skills need to continue to be supported. And of course, their content knowledge can always be improved in order to support their ability to access increasingly complex text by using their background knowledge that they bring to that text. And very important, if you look at that very last bullet there, they want students to embody the dispositions represented there in terms of perseverance, resilience, flexibility. Throughout our most recent revisions, we do believe our proposed curricula, as well as the implementation guides that we're about to write as soon as we approve this, will accomplish these on their list.
So you hear a lot of the same words in 8th, 9th grade transition conversation, because English is a discipline that spirals upward, and we're hoping that the sophistication continues to grow with that. And one thing that all English teachers are hoping kids will show up with each year is a continued love of reading. So we're hoping to foster that, bring it forward, reignite it if needed. It's a challenge, but it's something that they're hoping for. They also want students to come with an understanding of a variety of discussion techniques that will hopefully lead to their improved ability to speak and listen, collaborate with each other effectively. We want them, of course, to know how to annotate a text, how to take notes effectively and efficiently, and to be confident with their reading and annotating of complex text. We also want students to identify and understand, be able to analyze the use of figurative language. And we're hoping that they'll have a sense of how to use artificial intelligence ethically, effectively, and only when it's appropriate. This is an ongoing challenge for students should be confident, comfortable with all three types of writing, and to be able to utilize the full writing process beyond simply a theme essay. And they should have a solid base of content knowledge from which to draw and activate as they make sense of complex texts. They should be moving toward greater levels of sophistication with their questioning of both the author and the text. And they should know what MLA formatting and style are and how to employ them in their writing. On to the unit. So this is grade 6. In the first unit, which is called Sense of Belonging, the focus has been from the English perspective on analysis of character development. And so to support that through the content areas, students will also be exploring the core idea of physical geography and the role that that plays in shaping people and cultures around the world. And what we mean by geography here is literally where a person lives and what happens in that space or that community, that environment. Everything from natural disasters to their particular economy, their culture, and so on, and the impact that could have on shaping people who live in that environment. The final output for this will be a piece of argument writing. Unit 2 focuses on storytelling. Here we've bumped up looking at just traditional fairy tales to include world fairy tales. At the same time that students in grade 6 ELA will be reading and learning about fairy tales, traditional literature from around the world. They will be studying the Middle East and North Africa in social studies. And so we've included some of the fairy tales and stories from those regions. And then students will also be learning about the region's customs, traditions, language, government, and so on, and looking at how all of that influences the stories that they tell. The final output for that particular unit is narrative writing. Unit 3 is a study of science fiction and fantasy. And we decided this is the perfect place to make a connection with science. So as students are reading examples of both science fiction and fantasy, they will also be looking at informational texts that will be paired with some of these pieces. For example, around seasons, animals, and they'll build some background knowledge for those pieces to further develop their understanding of those. One example, if you were to look through the document, is students read All Summer in a Day, which is a science fiction story, and they will also be looking at an informational text piece about what seasons might look like on other planets. they're going to be doing another argument piece there as well. Unit 4 is their survival unit, surviving the unthinkable. Here we've connected with social studies and science. So we're drawing on the information we've learned from the extreme weather unit in science and some of the history behind such catastrophes as Titanic and more recently Hurricane Katrina. And they'll be using all of that information to really understand what it means to be in a survival situation. Persevered. They'll be doing a narrative writing piece for their final output. And the final unit of the year, making a positive impact, we'll be looking at people who've dared to make a change. At the same time that social studies is reading I Am Malala, they will also be supporting that reading and looking at this from an English lens, if you will. And they'll be looking at the idea of education as a universal human right in social studies, so that will be supported as well. Final output is informative or extended. Grade 7, the first unit is called Anchor Your Reading. This is a close reading and literary analysis. While we're reading The Hunger Games, we will also be looking at how geography, government, and societal structures impact groups of individuals. We'll also be pulling forward some of what they learned about the past from the previous year's exploration and continue to study the caste structure with excerpts from the book by titled Caste. The final output for this will be a narrative piece. Unit 2 is an argument writing unit. So here students will be exploring ethos, pathos, and logos as they create arguments. They will participate in an argument protocol that actually uses science and or social studies content. And that's what they will be deepening their understanding of that particular topic while they're understanding how to build an oral argument. And then they will transition to doing research about a topic of their choice and writing their own arguments. Unit 3. Since from the outside looking in, this is where they will be reading The Outsiders. And to support that particular reading experience, they will also be engaging with an exploration of 1960s technology, historical events, popular culture, music, anything that came from the 1960s to further help understand that particular text. They'll be doing an informatory or explanatory piece. Unit 4 is looking at historical fiction to examine injustice. Students are reading A Long Walk to Water in social studies, so we'll be using that as a sort of a mentor text for this historical fiction book club while we explore the same topic of injustice and its impact on human rights. They will be doing a multimodal piece here that includes both informative and narrative writing, as well as addressing questions. And Unit 5 is the mythology unit. So we're building on the idea of storytelling from 6th grade with fairy tales. 7th grade, they will get mythology. They'll be looking at the more traditional Greek mythology, but they'll also be studying some of the Native American oral traditions, those kinds of stories. So really looking at myths, stories, legends, and how that helps to shape a culture. And they'll be doing a narrative piece there too. So grade 8 begins with the poetry unit. So this particular unit, they've reshaped this, they've replaced it, moved it in the lineup, and also connected with social studies, who will be studying at that time the founding ideals in America by looking at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So they're going to look at territorial expansion specifically in 19th century American poetry, and they will be writing their own identity poems at the end of that unit. Unit 2, this is a narrative exploration, so it's sharing experiences that shape us through the art of narrative. The connections again are with social studies, so we're thinking about early American ideas and their connection to stories and memoir and play. Unit 3 is the dystopian unit. So we made some suggestions here in both social studies and science. And we're also pulling prior knowledge for grade 6 and 7. Again, about past, but aspects of the progressive era are studied, and industrialization and social inequities, and how those can contribute to dystopian-like environments around the world. So in addition, students will also discuss science and technology and how they also can empower humans, certainly, but also work against them. And they'll be doing some argument writing here. Unit 4 is voices from history that teach us about real world dystopias, and this is where they will read Night. We'll be looking at geography and American history related to the Holocaust and some of the other aspects of events from World War II, and then reading Elie Wiesel. And then Unit 5 is the Shakespeare unit. Aptly named History and Humanity Through the Lens of Drama. The teachers decided to use Shakespeare's comedy, Much Ado About Nothing. It's a play they've used in the past and have had great success with. At one point, apparently, Shakespeare was a part of the 8th grade curriculum, and that was the play that they used. And I think it's also a nice addition to the curriculum because they are not studying comedies in high school. So it's nice to end 8th grade with that a little bit more lighthearted.
Thanks for indulging us with that. It's a little bit long, but there's so much work put into it and so much thought put behind those units, and we really want to highlight that. So last but not least, in the proposal, we are asked for your support to purchase digital access to HMHs into literature. So although we are not following their scope and sequence, similar to what we're doing at the elementary level, I do want to highlight the reasons why this will be important. So first of all, teachers will be able to download and print several of the text selections that are noted in the proposed documents. Will be one resource they can access. For those, along with the text, there's also teacher guidance with suggestions for the teaching of the content and the skills, the grammatical concepts. We'll also be teaching them Latin and Greek roots that are directly correlated to the vocabulary of that content from science and social studies. And so this resource has some of the teacher guidance for that. The resource does make several suggestions on how to meet the needs of diverse learners, as well as suggestions for ways for teachers to collect that ongoing evidence during a lesson to check for student understanding so they can make adjustments in their teaching. We would also appreciate being able to consult this resource as we flesh out the tasks that students will be engaged in. As we write our implementation guides, there are lots of examples here, and it will give us some good ideas. And the resource does provide examples. They provide examples of what the models are of students. And then last but not least, this is a resource. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be able to highlight our most recent investments. We really hope that these documents your expectations. And again, Dr. Student, and we are thrilled for the products that was.
Dr. Parrish, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. For updating all of those documents. I know it was a lot of work. I truly appreciate all the work that went into updating that for all of us and giving it a little more time. I'm gonna start with the last slide first. I didn't know if you remembered or not discussed, but the Into Literature for secondary is in the 24-25 budget already.
Yeah, for 7,300, that's what I earmarked. That will give us digital access. I should have mentioned through our exploration of programming, we have plenty of teacher manuals. Teachers want hard copies. They can also have those. We may only need to purchase 1 or 2 of those, but the digital access is 3,300. If we did a 3-year, it would be 8,800. We save $1,000, but we would really like to see usage or after the first year, see if this would be something we would want to continue to purchase.
So just to clarify, the digital access is what we put in the budget. So what are you asking? I'm sorry, I'm not following what you're actually asking for.
Did you earmark the 3,300? We're saying that we also have hard copies as well, to accompany the digital access.
You want to buy hard copy.
No, we happen to have them. We have all the hard copies of the teacher guides because we got samples.
They don't need anything else.
Right.
Didn't you just
Yeah.
say we're going to ask you to?
We already have the 3,300.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But we want to make sure.
Please don't make me go back to the picture.
No. Budget's a key.
Okay, Okay, go ahead. All right, presentation, curriculum, questions? Mr. Krasnoff?
I just want to commend your team. I know there's a lot of work from all of you. We give you a task and it seems like you delivered. There's something in my mind you should be proud of. So thank you.
Ms. Guernsey?
Also want to applaud all the efforts that went into this. I mean, this, you were so responsive to the board, so I really appreciate it. Just have a couple of quick questions. Well, actually, I just put a big star on page 8 next to love of reading because that's like my favorite part of all this. So thank you for acknowledging that. Well, I was a little bit disappointed, but understand why there's not a separate course that's presented. I'm glad to hear that that might have played a part in pushing the rigor component, so well done. I have a implementation or two implementation questions. I'm wondering, so like for next phase, yes, I support this, fantastic, and assuming that it's implemented, when we talk about interdisciplinary learning, which is, I think, one of the most exciting movements forward, are we looking at the model of the team room and bringing the teams together in a larger way as part of that implementation? And also, do all the middle schools have team rooms? Like how does that play a part into this, if at all? And then the other question I have is, and so will that be part of it? Will there be implementation of this that might fall into the flex time category at the middle school? So this fantastic period of time that we have set aside and we talk about rigor and what's available, does that fit in?
I can't speak to flex time at all. I would leave that to the building leaders, the other team leaders to talk about flex. But I can say that, yes, there will be opportunities for all of the teachers to collaborate in really meaningful ways. I'll just give you an example of something I shared the other day with the middle school leadership team. So I noted that, as we've said already, that the social studies curriculum will eventually be changing. And one huge change will be that they will only go through the progressive era in 8th grade social, which means they will not get to the Holocaust. And that's a huge lift for the English teachers to have to try to navigate independently. They've been doing a lovely job already with their social studies counterparts, but it would be very hard to take that on. So one suggestion I made was maybe having something like a special half-day 8th grade schedule just before the reading of night, where sort of all hands on deck and hear all these experiences during that time that are led by social studies, science, English teachers to sort of reset their knowledge. And it would be the same experiences across all 3 middle schools. Shared experience. That's just one example.
That's fantastic because I know, we invest so much money into the team model, and I think anything we can do to sort of enhance that experience is amazing. And I would just implore you to explore this idea of using flex time to, kind of pushing the use of that too, so that we can take advantage of ELA rigor during that time, not just for the supports, right? But getting our kids ahead too.
Jackson Kelly?
Yeah, thank you. And just to echo my fellow board members, this was, well, I'll say, this was such an improvement. I mean, it's so much more rich, and the interdisciplinary connections are just about everything I could have hoped for. And I just so appreciate the time that went into that. And I love the 2 slides about the 5th to 6th grade and the 8th to 9th. I want to grab it, share it elsewhere, because it's such an important conversation, and such important needs, and to not have that, otherwise, why are we talking about vertical alignment? What do we need from those who precede us? So I just want to thank you for that. This was not a question I meant to ask, but I have to start gearing myself up now. Do you know, is social studies stopping at the Progressive because they're going to pick up high school American history in 1899? Are they going that direction?
So we should not really be talking about the decision social
Yeah, I
studies is
know.
about to make. This is based on what we know about the content standards. That decision has not been made, and I should have said that. This
Sorry.
is just our best guess at this point. So we're gonna leave that to social studies. Yeah.
My apologies, Lisa Oliver, if you're watching. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think it's an important reminder going forward, but that's one, well, okay, I won't go down that track. In the presentation, the only thing I asked based on the presentation, then I'd like to go to some of the questions I submitted to you, is that I would hope that you could, on the very first thing, the Board of Ed written feedback, that with the format that you used, or since we have now approved the curriculum policy, this time I'm saying it right, if that was a great method, I hope that you would share that with Dr. Zavajanzik, because obviously we've got more that are going to be coming up shortly. And I think that feedback would be really helpful, because when we passed it in policy, we knew we were shifting a burden onto staff to create a means of collecting our feedback, and that I hope it was helpful.
We liked, if I can respond, we liked that format because we were able to look vertically and horizontally for patterns and what kept coming up. And that's how we knew what to prioritize and triage, quite honestly. Obviously, interdisciplinary learning was number one. I heard that from everyone, right? The additional course, I only heard that from 2 board members. It didn't mean that it wasn't considered in the exact same way. It's just, it did help us to prioritize our priorities. Everything's a priority, but when you do that, then nothing is a priority. So that was very helpful. We like that format.
Okay, so some other, and some of them I'd like to follow up with you on. I don't want to get into some of the minutia, but one of the things I found, I just didn't understand the thinking behind the content. What will students be able to, what will they know? And those columns were a bit of a mystery to me. I mean, to have the parents share discussions under a content, what will students know? That's a technique. I mean, that's in an implementation guide. I don't understand that being in that column. Tone had to have appeared on almost every single one. At some point, aren't they expected to know it? I mean, we are sequentially going through these units. It's not like they're going from unit 1 to 5 or what have you. And there was also very little in terms of, no, what will they know? An awful lot of it really seemed more skill focused than knowledge focused. And that was something that I thought, again, if you're a new teacher getting this document, and again, maybe you're thinking, oh, that's all going to be in the implementation guide, but this is all that we have to look at. And I found it very lacking in that regard. So I don't know if that's something to speak to, or if.
I would love to. So when you look at the T-chart, the content and skills, really what that's looking at is unpacking the standards, with the content embedded in the standards and the skills embedded in the standards. We took it a step further, and we ended up embedding other kinds of content. When you see things like discussion techniques, you need to understand the rules about the discussion techniques. That's why we put that in there, to remind teachers that that's something, that's an expectation. We saw in the 8 to 9 transition, they wanted to make sure students knew and had experiences with a variety of discussion techniques. So then we highlighted it there. So we also put in things like culture, things that were coming from science and social studies. Figurative language is content, it's ELA content, right? So you're going to see a little bit of a mix. We went beyond what the requirement was in terms of what that template asked for, in terms of the content and skills from the standards. And that's why you saw a little bit more than just that. We didn't think that that would give enough information to a teacher. Determine text details. Determine is the skill. Text details is the content. We went above that because we needed to show you the robust nature of what those skills were within that grade level.
Yeah, I guess that's just not, I understand unpacking a standard. However, then that is made, it is the readings that we put into it and the essential questions that we put into it and what we're focusing on in terms of the literature that then becomes the vehicle. And is there nothing that we're expecting them to know about that, if you understand what I'm saying? Figurative language, I understand that you're picking up on what these terms are and how to identify them. That to me is something that students will then know. But I don't know, I'm happy to go back and look at the list again, but that to me was something I didn't, because that's also not, I thought, exactly how we'd seen it in the high school documents. And this seemed to take a very different direction.
Trying to give you everything.
That, yes, I got that impression, but
Maybe that's why.
I might come back to that with you. Hold on. I sent you in a lot. Oh, I had one question about grade 6. I didn't understand, and maybe this is a social studies issue. Are they planning to move the study of the ancient Greek culture to 7th grade? Because otherwise I was wondering why the mythology unit isn't coinciding with that.
Say clearly, I don't know about social studies. I don't want to make that mistake again. I don't know what they're doing, but I do know that there has been in existence for some time a fairy tale unit in 6th grade, a mythology unit in 7th. So to have, even if, the mythology unit might pair more perfectly maybe with social studies as it exists now, it doesn't mean that the 7th grade mythology unit wouldn't benefit from what they learned in 6th grade. So bringing it forward, and actually, I think, one could argue that students will retain that information a little bit more because they're relearning it and applying it in a new way as they're reading some of the stories. So as I think, as Janine said at the beginning of this, is really trying to honor all the work that has been done and written, and those units existed already in those places. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm not sure what you would like me to do, because some of these are a little bit specific to some of the areas. I don't know if I should wait for your answers or if I should pose a few more of them. I'm interested in the answers to the questions. It wasn't busy work, but something like the unit 2, which is focused on the making arguments, you make reference to, which I think is great preparation for high school writing as well. The ethos, pathos, and logos, but everything in the unit was logos focused. I didn't see anything in the document regarding the credibility, the, emotional. It was all rational in its basis. And that to me was a weakness to the unit.
Well, within the unit itself, it may look like a weakness in that particular box, but in the unit itself, they definitely teach kids about ethos and pathos. And they look at those and the impact on them. They analyze the arguments, the impact of, a pathetic appeal in an argument and what that would do to the reader as opposed to one that's based purely on logic. So it is definitely in there, whether if it wasn't highlighted as well as you would have liked it.
I thought I could only read what was on the paper, and on paper, it reads as totally rational focus, and that's why I raised the question. I'll just ask you 2 more quick ones, and then again, follow up afterward. When you get into the Greek mythology, which again, I know I've been hammering at that for years because I think it is so vitally important for building content knowledge, will there be any common expectations of certain things being covered? Because that's not in the curriculum document, and nor is that's what a kind of thing I would have looked to see in the what students will know column, and it wasn't there.
So they will certainly deal with like the hero's quest, for example, and get into some of those structures. And then some of the common myths that they will all read about include, I think Arachne is one of the myths that they are looking at. They have a myth that's from Maui that they all read and study. And then Prometheus is another mythological story that they all know.
And obviously for content knowledge, I don't think reading something Maui is helpful. That doesn't mean it's not interesting, and that doesn't mean it doesn't fulfill a literary purpose. I'm not questioning that at all. But for building content knowledge and background, there's an awful lot, but this is our one shot at in this unit. So I'll just say that that's a unit I would have wished more of, because I think it is so helpful for high school, but whatever. And then the only other thing I wanted to ask about was the "Oh Captain, my Captain" placement, which I did not understand occurring in a unit that seemed to be focused on expansionism, and that's not. Great poem. However, its placement seemed odd.
Well, it's a poem that I think, obviously a lot of people know. They know that it's about Lincoln. And it's an easy one to tie in, along with the Pioneers poem that we also listed from Walt Whitman. And I think it's just an opportunity to explore some of those more traditional pieces that I'm not sure that they get into in high school, but it's another opportunity to connect to some social studies content, even if it isn't necessarily.
Okay, just that was the social studies curriculum, whatever. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
What else? I have one super quick one. I just want to also just note the 5th to 6th grade transitions, the 8th to 9th, just a great intro to any curriculum building, and I found it to be super helpful. But just one quick question about unit, sorry, I'm going all the way up, the 8th grade that unit. I had asked some pretty specific questions in your first iterations about that interview, and it's in there. It doesn't specify with a Holocaust survivor. We kind of went through that publicly, but can you just kind of speak to how that unit looks to you now as a whole? Obviously, it's going to look a little bit different. I imagine that every few years it's going to look a little bit different over the next 10, and kind of where your staff was, where your mind was at as you were recrafting that with our feedback.
Sure. So
Page number.
So I think that certainly agree with you that it's an important skill for students to develop, to be able to conduct an interview and to do so, dealing with sensitive experiences and do that respectfully. So they were as eager to keep that as a part of the unit as you were to see it there. So that was not a hard decision to make, right? So on their part. But as you noted, that's going to continue to change and evolve because there simply won't be Holocaust survivors left to interview. There will be, however, like families of those people. And so they might have that opportunity to talk to people like, what was it like to grow up with a parent or a grandparent who's a survivor. So I think that was important. I think they will continue to support that.
Thank you. And like I said, seeing the words, perseverance, resiliency, flexibility, and empathy as the guidance of this curriculum, I have no doubt, but I think for our public and our parents and our staff to hear that reiterated is valuable time spent. So thank you for this work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation, for all the changes. This will agenda it's on, but one of the upcomings. There's just so many.
Thank you.
You might get one. All right, moving on to public comment. Anyone out there with us to provide public comment? Now is your time. You can come on up.
I wasn't planning to, but if there's anybody else left. Well, this one at 186 White Oak Road. Just a few things. So in terms of facilities planning, I remember being totally surprised that we are spending such significant dollars in our waterfowl in facilities that are in floodplain, in areas without septic or without sewer service. That just, coming from the real estate development world, just like shocked me that such a huge investment in our waterfall was happening in those areas. So just encouraging while you're going through this process to think really wildly and big. Are there land swap opportunities? Not necessarily maybe within, right in that district, but adjacency. Is there anywhere Parks and Rec facility, fields, things like that, where you can be offering up BOE sites to swap with something else. These are huge, huge dollars that you're talking about spending in areas that, that multiplier on infrastructure is a significant one. And, also just, as you were talking through ed specs and how ed specs have changed, again, thinking as an architect and a developer, really understanding, is there an optimal size of school? When you're thinking about support spaces and classroom sizes. And in my opinion, that's what we should be working towards, rather than putting out little fires, is figuring out what that optimal size school is, building it, renovating to it, and then adjusting that waterfall accordingly. If we now need, a certain number of small spaces to each, a certain number of classroom spaces, that has to roll up to an optimal number somehow. And I see just a massive amount of inefficiencies in how many facilities we have and what that rolls out to. And I just challenged the group to kind of think about that really holistically in making these major decisions, particularly at these two sites. The point about having to report to other town bodies is an important one. But I think there's a little bit of strategic inertia that can happen when looking at that, rather than just looking at the waterfall and looking at two sites and what can we be building there. And then just a comment on Stratfield School. I hear a lot. We are excited to potentially this idea of welcoming new students. There is some concern at Stratfield School in terms of staffing, turnover of staff, lack of a school psychologist for all of the whole year. And before we do anything with that, please solve that problem and respond to that little request.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Rinaldi. All in favor? I have to say it is unanimously. Good night, everyone. Thank you.